and welcome. Just want to say hello to everyone out there. Krista, thank you. And Brian, thank you for coming. It's going to just be me right now, Kurt. Don't know if anybody else is going to be joining. We're a little low staff within the summer time here due to a lot of other stuff going on. But I'm going to, just to let you know what I'm doing tonight, we're going to go over one more thing on uh, John Nelson Darby, and then tomorrow I'm actually going to do a presentation over his actual what he understood via what we would consider dispensationalism. And in doing that, just want to let you know. Then after that, next Thursday, I'll look at doing something completely different. But some people ask me why doing the Darby thing. Well, one thing is for me, I'm interested in it. Hello, and the reason why I got interested is because I myself was starting to question a lot of the current dispensational foundations. It's not that I was completely getting rid of everything out of it. It's just there was some things that I was not able to hold that would be known under Schofield and Ryrie, I and I was starting to change it up that it really wasn't that type of a dispensation. Then what I found is a friend of mine who introduced me to Roy Huebner. His first book was Elements of Dispensational, Volume 1. And with reading that, and what I would say is at least the first 50 pages, it started to understand, because he did a work where basically he spent he was like I said, he was in another field, but he spent 20 years in the last part of his life working on trying to systematize what Darby actually said. Well, I went ahead and I got a hold of that. I looked into it, and I started realizing some of the things he's saying I coincide with. So it helped me to say I could still call myself a dispensationalist in that way. Now, I don't hold to everything that Darby held to. Darby is known as a very high Calvinist. I'm not a Calvinist. I used to be. I used to be a confused Calvinist, I would say, because I kept switching up their definitions to still kind of lean over, because I only knew of two things: Calvinism and Arminianism, and I also knew there was, Roman Catholic and then Eastern. But in doing that, yeah, I'll explain what dispensationalism is in just a moment, Krista. Not a problem. I can understand. And so, in dealing with that, after reading that, I started understanding that there is that Darby actually kind of dealt with some stuff that I'm more seeing. But like I said, we'll find out that it's not there. Now, for those, as Krista asked, what is a dispensationalist? A dispensationalist is one that recognizes that God has different administrations and he's doing different things. I'll give a lot more detail in that, where tomorrow, in some ways, where I'll also deal, because and throughout the conversation here that we'll have, because I will deal not only with Darby, but I will deal with Schofield, Ryrie, and their two schools. I can even work on some of the mid-acts dispensationalists. So there is a broad camp, or different groups in the camp and all, but in dealing with that. But a dispensationalist basically looks and sees that God has different administrations that he is working in. Ryrie did a great job. I would hold that Ryrie did a good job on giving an outline of what a dispensational is in his book on dispensationalism. And that is, a dispensational has to have, one is God setting up some rules. He has a steward that he tells the rules to, and that steward then goes ahead and gives the rules by which we know how we work within that. There's a lot of discussion and other things as to does in the starting of how many dispensations. Now, to truly be a dispensationalist, it looks like you have to at least hold to 3 dispensations, at least. Now, a lot of people will say, well, if you see that there's a difference between the Old and New Testament, then you're a dispensationalist. This is not true, because the reality is you're not really seeing, recognizing 2 actual administrations or giving explanations. You're just seeing that God did make a change, but you're not really able to say why that change, why there is a change. And in Darby's understanding, and I hold to this same understanding with Darby, is that a dispensation does not have to end for a new one to begin. So you can have multiple dispensations happening at the same time. And so Krista asked, so what you're saying is God has rules, and he gives those rules to certain people in the present of biblical times. Well, not really biblical times, because when we usually talk biblical times, we're talking about the Bible times. But we have a dispensation that people say that is today. I would hold that there is the dispensation of the grace of God, which happened, which is the creation of this new body called the church, and that would be a new way of administrating. But we still have the law. I would still say we have the law going on, and in doing that. But like I said, I'll go more into a lot more detail as we discuss what's going on with this. And then even tomorrow when I do my presentation on the paper dealing with Roy Hubner and his looking at it. But what we will be looking at here is Rev Reed's, and he's going to be speaking with a friend of his, not Gribbins this time, but another person who knows a lot about Darby. And so he's going to go ahead and share different things than what we did last Thursday. So in dealing with that, that's part of what we're looking at doing and all. Yeah, and the good thing also is if you can't watch it live, it will be made available so you can watch it afterwards. And if you wanted to put questions in the comments, I do check. It doesn't come directly to me, but I know Charles, he can let me know if there is a comment, or if there's, or if someone, or like I said, I'll check and I'll see also, because I know, because again, this is the layman seminary and Charles is the key person. And so we're using his platform. So I don't get notified on his platform, but I do look in and see that. Yes, the question was, and Charles is correct, at least what is the opposite of dispensationalist? It would be covenant theology. That's primarily the other view that's out there. Now, there are a lot of other people that would deal with hybrids, other things like that, where kind of take a two-way, because there's, I think, where when you get into progressive dispensationalists, they start changing the ball to an integrative hermeneutics, which I myself see more of starting to blend things between the two camps. And I don't, all that, yeah, the new covenant theology, which would be more covenant theology, but understanding there will be a millennial period. Well, even old and new covenant, that varies too. Because within dispensationalism, because again, asking about old and new covenant, the old covenant is the Mosaic covenant. And the new covenant is what's today. Now, part of the problem is within dispensationalism, some hold that the Mosaic covenant has already ended, and now we are under the new covenant. Then you have others like myself that hold that the Mosaic covenant has not ended yet. It will not end until the millennial kingdom. And so and so as the church, we're not under any covenant. Just to give a overview, this is a thing that I'm going to have to work on. I'm doing a paper. It's a large subject, and it's going to so in dealing with it, where I'm going to present some of the differences and things like that as an overview. But then I would recommend for my view where to look at a specific book, but there's others out there that can do that. So yeah, and again, there's a lot of discussion on the new covenant and all. So what we're going to deal with is, like I said, with Free Grace Reacts. I'm again going to be dealing with Rev Reeves' channel, and he goes over different books and things like that. So if you want to look on his channel, and you can find, and you're wanting an overview of different books, and it's not just dispensational books. It's just a whole lot of different books he deals with. He does kind of an overview, and in doing that, that's what would do it. Now, what happened is it was this new book that came out, or let's see if I can get J.N. Darby and the Roots of Dispensationalism by Crawford Gribben, that I got me started. And Rev Reeve, he did an overview. Then last week we looked at the overview, and then we also looked at his interview with Gribbens. And so today we're going to look at Rev Reeve, but he's going to speak with another person who is more of an expert on Darby. Now, I don't consider myself an expert. I'm not taking all that time and things like that. But what I have done is I do read what the experts have brought out. So it makes me a layman expert or something like that. Because, again, a lot of people look at Darby and they know the name, but they know very little bit about him. And so that's one of the reasons why in doing this, because even Charles, he wanted me to go ahead and bring some of this up so we can kind of get an idea of who this guy Darby is. We hear about him. We say we're dispensational, but what exactly is going on here? And so that's part of why we went ahead. I'm presenting a little bit of this. Now, like I said, next Thursday, I'm going to do something else just to give a break since we've done it in 2 weeks and all on dispensationalism. And again, just for our minds and for our, in dealing with. But but again, you never know. There might something else come up, and we go ahead and deal with it even more in some other areas. So I'm going to go ahead and start the video here, and we're going to go ahead and deal with a conversation Rev Reeves had with his friend here, who is an expert on Darby. Let me know that you do hear when I do start it.
Welcome to Rev Reads. We have another author interview today, and this is one that I've been really looking forward to. I'm super excited about this one. Recently, I reviewed Crawford Gribben's J.N. Darby and the Roots of Dispensationalism, and I found it to be a great, very helpful book, and I hope that you go and watch the review if you haven't yet to see my thoughts on Gribben's biography on Darby and the Roots of Dispensationalism, which is mainly on Darby's thoughts and not so much biography on his life. And since I am not a Darby expert, I contacted the person that I believe knows Darby the best, and that is Dr. James Fazio. And I want to go over his.
Okay, so again, like I said, Sean Wilson is Rev Reads. It's not for Reverend in that way. It was basically a joke because of dealing with the Boston Red Sox, because he was dealing with baseball and got the named Rev, and then it's Reads, Reads. And so it's basically an emphasis of one of his focuses on sports, and then also that he does do a lot of reading. I wish I could read like that, but frankly, I never could pick up speed reading, because what happens is I immediately start slowing down, focusing on the words, and I never could pick up speed reading. So it's nice that we have people like that.
Qualifications just momentarily, because I think that you will agree with me that James is somebody you want to talk to about Darby. James has a THM from Southern California Seminary in New Testament exegesis. He has a D-Min from Southern California Seminary in Christian education, and he just recently, we'll give the golf clap to James, he just recently got his PhD from Queen's University Belfast in history, specifically looking at 19th century Irish evangelicalism, and his dissertation was J.N. Darby and the Ruin of the Church. Did I get that?
Okay, so as you can tell, Dr. Fazio does know something about that era. He dealt with the ruin of the church, which actually is a lot of what Darby spoke about also. He also dealt with, Roy Huebner wrote a book called The Ruin of the Church, giving us what Darby was actually saying about that. Again, if you are interested, you could always go to Present Truth, or what is it? I do apologize. Let me get that here. It would be, Present Truth Publishers. And if you go to them, it's a Brethren website, and they have a lot of free books, free PDFs, free charts, things like that deal with Darby and some of the other brethren in dealing with that. But again, most of what Darby was by Roy Huebner, and Roy Huebner went ahead, and when he originally started, he put it, you had to actually buy the book. But when he passed away, his family said, hey, this is too important. We're going to make it free. And so they have made it free. So if you are interested in looking into any of these subjects, I encourage you to go to Present Truth Publishers and look there and grab the downloads and things like that. And also, Darby was Irish. So again, getting his degree at Belfast kind of just gives that extra oomph, because again, that's where a lot of the books and publishing with Darby, or his writings and all, but because again, it would have been in the language that they're not so much English, but again, the language that used and all, and or the Irish language. And in dealing with that, that's another reason why I'm not a Darby expert. I don't speak Irish.
That title right for it,
Yep.
James?
Yes,
All
it is.
right. And so not only does he have his PhD in church history, but specifically his dissertation was on Darby. Today, he's the Dean of Bible and Theology, as well as a professor at Southern California Seminary. So I don't know who else I would rather talk to about a Darby biography than James Fazio. So James, welcome so much to Rev Reads.
Thank you. Good to be back with you again.
Yeah, so we're thrilled. Yeah, James was here. We talked about Discovering Dispensationalism before, which he co-edited with Corey Marsh, and also for Forged from Reformation. We talked about that other book on dispensational history. So we got our in-house expert on dispensational history.
Okay, I actually went ahead and I got the one Discovering Dispensationalism. And the thing is I'm ready, and that one deals with a lot of citations, and what it's dealing with, it's going beyond the one book that I can't remember his name wrote about dispensational, but he dealt with every time he saw the word dispensational, and we can't really grab a hold of it that way. And that was one of my issues and I've talked with him and all, but what they did under Discovering Dispensational, they took the idea key ideas of dispensationalism, and they looked throughout history, and they said, were there other times that these ideas, and of course they found out these ideas were, again, we see in the Bible, we see in the 2nd century, 3rd, 4th, the Middle Ages, the Reformation, throughout all of history, we see these thoughts, maybe not all put together, but we do see that they have been presented. So that's another book, if you're wanting to grab a hold of the foundation and all, would be Discovering Dispensationalism.
With James Fazio, so I'm thrilled to have him here to talk about Crawford Gribben's book, J. and Darby and the Roots of Dispensationalism. So let's start off with a question I think should be asked first, as far as for Gribben's book on.
Okay, again, this is the key book that we're dealing with, J. and Darby and the Root of Dispensationalism. Now, again, Dr. James Fazio will go into more detail than just the book, but the book does give a lot of overview and things like that, but it isn't dealing so much with, again, with the actual systematizing and all that of what Darby believed, but it's basically dealing with the kind of a simple biography in the preface, then dealing with his soteriology, dealing with his ecclesiology, dealing with his pneumatology, and dealing with eschatology, and those, and which were the 4 main areas that really dealt with his whole life and in his teachings and things like that. Though he dealt with a lot of other subjects too.
On Darby, and that is, why should anyone want to read Crawford Gribben's writing on Darby? Because I didn't know who Crawford Gribben is. So why is somebody that we should listen to? Why is he someone we should listen to on the subject of Darby?
Well, I'll tell you this. 7 years ago, when I was looking to write a PhD on John Nelson Darby, I looked to Crawford Gribben and to study under him. He had been previously involved in premillennial research as part of a study group that launched at Trinity College Dublin, where he had been teaching for several years. He had done a lot of work on Darby, a lot of research on Plymouth Brethren and millennialism and perspectives on premillennialism, specifically dispensational thought. So I was looking to study under him, and by that time he had actually transferred to Queen's University Belfast, and so that was the reason that I went to Queen's University Belfast. It was to study under Crawford Gribben. So he is one of the leading experts on Darby, researching, writing today. Who, if somebody wants a university degree, that he's one of the few ones taking on those kind of projects.
And I have to admit, with the fact of Dr. Fazio doing that, where he could really learn and all, and makes it will make it a very interesting conversation as we go on, and in doing that. So, with the studies and things like that is going to help with giving us even more of an understanding of who Darby is.
And it was a wonderful experience for me to do so. In fact, he and I read through Darby, and we were discussing many times, probably on more of a bi-weekly pattern, but over the last 5 years. And we've had a lot of conversation about Darby. So as I was researching, and my research focuses on the first 2 decades of Darby's, the development of Darby's thought, specifically concerning the ruin of the church, his ecclesiology, though I do deal with a little bit of his soteriology. And it covers the years when he got saved. So his grappling with all the ideas, his ecclesiology, his grappling with the Anglican Church, and then his drift away from that. And so in many ways, I'm looking at the same things that Crawford did, but he really started his approach at 1840, where mine ends, and then looked at kind of from the 40s all the way through to the end of his life. And so his reading was in that area. My reading was in the early years, because I was focused on how his ideas developed. Yeah.
Also want to let you know that Gribben's doesn't claim to be a dispensationalist. He doesn't claim to be a covenantal. He's more of a historian. In his study, he sees all these different things, and so he could when it deals with the different areas, he can kind of go back and forth because he's looking at things more through history than he is as to some, and it creates a way where he's not able to always set up as to say, I'm going to take this view or whatever. And which makes for a good historian, because he's seeking out for what the actual truth is, rather than just trying to deal with dispensational and, oh, I'm a dispensational, so I got to prove dispensationalism. Fazio is a dispensationalist, but again, with his work and what he's doing and why he did things, he did it in such a way where, again, trying to deal with the truth. And this was the same way with Hubner. Wormcheck is another guy that does, where really focusing on what did actually Darby say. Because I will admit, when we get into the non-experts, what happens is all sides, dispensationalists, non-dispensationalists, are making a lot of unfactual things about it. And as a result, it has created a lot of problems, animosity, and other things, which happens when you deal with those that really don't know what is really being said.
So I guess when it comes to a book on Darby, when I talk to most people about Darby, I feel like most people are in the same camp that I do. And that is, our knowledge of J.N. Darby falls basically under the breadth of, we know Darby invented the idea of the pre-trib rapture. And that's all that people know about Darby. And it's very, very surface level. So most people are very much a novice on Darby's life and what he taught. So most of the people approaching Gribben's book aren't going to know much about Darby. Do you think that this is a book that would be helpful for somebody who doesn't know Darby, or do you think you should have a certain understanding level to come in? So do you think this is novice friendly?
It depends on your interest. It does get into the weeds a bit, and it also is more of a history of the Plymouth Brethren thought, expanding from Darby, deals with, because of the 40s. The decade of the 40s was a turbulent time for the Plymouth Brethren. It was a time when they were truly coming into their own, and also divided the schism with Benjamin Newton and the exclusives and the open brethren. And I mean, so much happened at that time, and that's really where he's entering into the discussion.
And I will agree with him. It is, I would say it's a good book to read, but again, the problem is if you're interested. If you're not interested, you're having an overview like what we're trying to do right now would be the better way to deal with it, so that you just grab some, you're now understanding, getting a better idea of what's going on, rather than being where I actually am interested. So I do actually get the things, and I read more about in those areas. And again, because of my background, my studies, my other things that I've done, because I actually grew up in a dispensational church. Now, I didn't start really learning dispensationalism until I was like 15. And when I left my youth group for the old people's class, and the guy there, who was also a doctor, Dr. Sexsmith, he went ahead and he was teaching a lot of dealing with dispensationalism, eschatology, things like that. And it gave me a starting point and with doing that. But even upon first hearing, and especially with the Schofield view of, you have a dispensation and then it has to end and then to make a new one. And I automatically looked at it and I'm like, how, but we still see these still going on, except for the innocent part. And so I kind of looked at it and I said, we got to make it more of a staircase, because these things are still going on, these different dispensations, because it's not showing us actually ended. And then as I formulated, there's even more in doing that. Let me see. Krista says she goes ahead and says, dispensation usually is a literal interpretation of the Bible and believes that divine revelation unfolds throughout the Bible. That's one aspect. That's more to what would be considered the literary or literal, grammatical, historical hermeneutics, in which we find the literal meaning and in dealing with it. But that is one of the things that of starting to make a dispensationalism. Because again, we take it from because of that literal understanding and trying to find a literal meaning. And of course, we understand that there is all these different forms of language, forms of poetry, proverbs, parables, history, didactic, or that of just teaching, things like that. And from that, we have to take it in its context, in its years and dealing with. And from that, those who are dispensational, that's where we've come out of to where we've formed our dispensationalism. It's not, and I will admit, we are not, dispensationalists are not in 100% agreement with one another in all areas. In fact, in most areas, we deal with a lot of differences, things like that. But that's just the reality of dispensationalism. With its, because even Darby teaches, Darby never actually called himself a dispensationalist. He used the word dispensational in multiple meanings, and he never really systematized his understanding. And of course, but again, then you had others that started to systematize and then moving over, and it created a whole different thing. So it's quite different. It's quite interesting on the whole development and things like that. Okay, what Google says the definition is, well, Google would be wrong. Mid-Acts says, he goes in and writes, from what I can remember and have heard, there are also varying positions on dispensation. Exactly. Right now, and Mid-Acts would be one. Right now, there's basically 4 or 2 major schools. You would have more into Darby, which can relate in, and then more into what Schofield did. Now, under Schofield, you have multiple things of where from there you now have coming out where you did Mid-Acts, then revised dispensationalism, which would be more Ryrie. And then after that, you have progressive dispensationalism. So those are the basically, so we would say Darby, there was Schofield, there was Ryrie, or Mid-Acts, Ryrie, and then the fifth school then would be progressive. So we do have five schools out there of what we would have to say is dispensationalism. So yeah, it's a like I said, it's can be interesting if you go into this and study it, and you're going to realize there are differences, there are different ways of looking at and things like that. So let's go ahead and move on.
But it's also for good reason, because that's when there was a much more codified ethos and character of Plymouth Brethren-ism. So it is a good place to start. He's also, Crawford also offers a very, I think, a charitable portrait of Darby, which is important, that he is not an overly biased, harsh critic who's just trying to mischaracterize him. So it's valuable in many regards, also because of its kind of big picture, sort of a bird's eye view, and the organization of it to look at the different areas of thought, the way he organizes it: soteriology, ecclesiology, pneumatology, and eschatology. So it is a.
So again, the 4 things he mentioned: salvation, the church, this study of the Spirit, end times, Those are the four areas of dealing with in this book and what Christ was dealing. No, this is not a debate, Scolari. What this is a presentation. I'm doing more of an educational aspect at this point because, again, I was asked by Charles, and others were interested in getting to know a little bit more about Darby. And since the problem is when I start mentioning different things, it's areas that most of the others in the layman seminary do not know about. And so what they wanted me to do is go ahead and have at least some presentations and do some of these things so that when I do mention things, we do have something to say, well, here we can look, you can look at this, or if you want to know more about it, you can look at this one and because again, when you deal with the seminary level, and it should be with the college level, because again, but we don't see it as much today, is that, but you do have different teachers, different professors, and not all of them agree with one another. But again, what you have is mature civil people that can discuss these things and deal with these things rather than always attacking. And so that was one of the things that of the layman seminary. And when Charles opened up more to have other people come on and do these things, it's to bring about, to show what's going on, so that, because one of the things is Charles, and I agree with Charles, the truth is more important than our theology. We want to know what the truth is. If the truth and our theology does not go together, we need to get rid of our theology. Now, when I say theology, I'm not talking about clear statements of the Bible. Theology usually is a systematic way, or that of taking other things and bringing them together to create an understanding. So if we are doing something and it's not actually scriptural, and it gets proven, then we need to change up our theology. We need to change up how our thinking is and come in line with the truth. So this is part of the reasons why we sometimes will show some very different things, and why we do have also debate videos, and we go through and we show the differences in thinking. And even when we have a panel, you will see at times we're disagreeing with one another. But again, we try to do it in such a way that it shows that even as we disagree, it shows a way that how fellow Christians can disagree and be able to still be unified in Jesus Christ. And so that's because, again, that's one of the key things of Scripture, is that for the body of Christ to be unified. And it seems like all we most are just always looking ways to separate things like that. But no, the reality is we should be looking at ways to unify rather than to always separate, not be a part of. Now, I can understand where you deal with different denominations, and maybe you can't work denomination to denomination sometimes, but you might be able to work on certain things. Maybe it could. I know when I was in Virginia when 9/11 happened, and when the where they say the Washington sniper, but that was actually down more closer to more in my area, in Fredericksburg and a little bit above, that those things were happening. But in dealing with that, we were able to get together for the 9/11 and bring a lot of people together for prayer for our soldiers, for those that they're fighting against, for the salvation of both sides, things like that. We when it came to the sniper, is for safety, for protection, for him to be caught, things like that. So there are things that we should be able to work with, and then there's things we may not be able to because we just aren't in line. But that doesn't always mean we are giving up the unity and doing that. So yeah, and I was part of a lower I, being growing up in the Conservative Baptist Fellowship, but then other Baptists and things like that. So I understand. I've been around a lot, and then when I went up to Liberty, I was dealing with a whole lot of different denominations too, and learning to work with them, and so that we can deal with the gospel being presented, dealing with equipping the saints, and things like that. And you learn to find how to work and things like that without compromising. Again, that's one of the things is we don't want. But there were things we understood wasn't the issue of what we're dealing with, so we're not going to make it an issue when we're trying to do these things. Okay, let's continue on.
A big sweeping view of these things, but it also focuses on those areas less so with a view to Darby himself. So you don't see the man as much as you see the thought. That's the focus.
Yeah, no, I actually liked that it was a focus on the thought.
Yeah,
I think that's the most important thing about Darby.
Right. But I would say another thing about Darby, just in general, this is a major approach that I've taken in presenting Darby, is that Darby, he's an enigma. He is.
Okay. Tell me if it's too fast. I'll move it back to 125 again. I know Rev Reeves is going to go real quickly, but this allows Dr. Fazio to speak up faster, but not too and all. And I do agree with what he says. Darby is an enigma. We know the name, but we really don't know the person. And so that's part of what's happening and all. And that's another reason why in showing this. Okay.
Paradoxically, and the phrase is on his tombstone, that he is unknown and well-known. And well-known in the sense that, I mean, as well-known as a more obscure Christian history figure could be, but his name, many people associate with, as kind of you said earlier, the one thing you know about Darby is he invented the pre-trib rapture. And the fact is he didn't invent the pre-trib rapture, right? And it's true of so many other people who would say, well, the one thing I know about Darby is, he held to multiple ways of salvation for the different peoples of God. Or the one thing I know about Darby is, and pretty much whatever the one or two things that anybody knows about Darby, he held to 7 dispensations. He started the 7 dispensation scheme. Everything anybody knows about Darby is not true. It's not an accurate characterization of Darby. Darby didn't hold to any of those things. And I set that out in my work. I say, look, all these things that Darby is known for, he didn't subscribe to any of them. And because he remains very much unknown. It's a lot of people are.
And that is true. What we consider dispensational today, it's completely different than what Darby held to. And again, that's what I'm going to more deal with tomorrow when we deal with more of the overview of 9 points that kind of overview and deal with what Darby held to, and I'll deal with some other things and doing that. Well, yeah, he had views that we can agree with, we can't agree with. It depends on what spectrum you're dealing with. You got to understand his times also. For him, you're still dealing with Calvinist, Arminian, or you go over to Roman Catholic for the most part. He was a Calvinist. He was a high Calvinist. Yet he acted in a lot of ways in trying to be more Catholic, but in the lower C, not the high Roman Catholic, but in the lower C, or in that of universal. And in dealing with and things like that, he basically rejected the mainstream churches. And when he talks about the ruin of the church, he's talking about the denominations and things like that. And so, yeah, it's and we will deal with some of that areas, because again, when going through his 9 things, there's things I do agree with, and then there are things I do not. And there are things I differ on than he does. So even in that, it's not 100%. And so what's the reality is that there, even today, like I said, we don't fully agree. So there are the different camps, there are the different subdivisions, and then you even got subdivisions under the different camps and all. So it's quite an interesting dilemma, and I think that could be part of what has moved dispensationalism more out of the academic again, because it actually got into the academic and it showed that it really hasn't developed itself as clearly and has settled its foundation as well as many have thought it to be. Okay, so.
Anachronistically, looking back on Darby through the lens of more modern dispensationalists, whether it's Schofield, which is usually the extent to which anybody's looking at dispensationalism, or or even more recent, perhaps than that, whether it's you've got Brooks or Schaefer or Lyrie or Walbert, or all the way up to Dulles Seminary. A lot of people are looking back on Darby through the lens of these people and not really looking at Darby at all. And none of those accurately or even really claim to or try to reflect Darby. It's really not it. Darby is just a shadowy figure in the past that really nobody typically will engage with.
Yeah, I thought coming in.
And I agree with that. Basically, Schofield, he did not really engage with Darby. He got his things from others, not so much from Darby. And of course, things started to change. Even the main guy he taught went more to a 7 dispensational and then a post-trib. So you had all these different things happening and differences and all, even in Darby's time, as to what was believed. Then basically after Darby passed away and things started to move on, a lot of them moved more away from the Calvinist settings and all, and kind of went into different areas, and in doing so, and changed, and of course changed up, and doing that, and then of course you got, like I said, you got Schofield, Schaefer, who started Dallas Theological Seminary, Ryrie even, and none of them actually dealt with Darby. That was the most disappointing thing with Darby or Ryrie's book, is he actually didn't interact. But I don't think any of them really knew what Darby did. I have a book on my bookshelf that I did years ago, and basically he was claiming that Darby held to the 7 dispensations, but he didn't hold those as dispensations. He held them as maybe ages. He used them as a different thing. And the problem also is that he would use the word dispensational or dispensation or dispensations in the common vernacular, but then also in the biblical vernacular. And so again, Darby was very confusing in what he wrote, and it takes a lot of looking in and things like that to grab a hold of what Darby is actually saying if you're reading his actual works.
Into it from my perspective as a novice, probably the only thing that really I would have liked to have had more background information going into it was about the split with the brethren that you mentioned, like the exclusive open brethren. That was one thing that he just sort of, the way he talks about it, you should probably have some background information on what it is, because a lot of times he's talking about this is, but I'm just going through for looking what Darby said about stuff.
There is a good book out there. It's been out for quite a while, about maybe almost 2 decades now, called The Story of Conflict. And its entire focus is that conflict alone. Benjamin Newton and Darby controversy. It's called The Story of Conflict, Paternoster. I believe, I know they originally published, I think they're still publishing it, unless somebody else has got it, but it's still available, and that's the focus of it.
So if somebody has read other books on Darby, and they feel like they are familiar with Darby, they've read the synopsis of the Bible maybe, and some of his other letters and writings and so forth. What do you think someone who is already familiar with Darby will be able to glean from critically? What do you think might be some unique contributions he brings to the thought of Darby, those who are already experienced?
I would say anybody who's already, at least to a cursory level, familiar with Darby, this book would be a tremendous value, because if you know even a little bit about Darby, this will help. As I said, the big picture. The trouble with studying Darby is that there's so much, there's voluminous works out there, even just of what's published, not to mention what is not readily available. So there's just so much that Darby wrote, and almost never organized in any form or fashion. Besides that, you have a body of literature that was produced over 60 years, at least 50 years, that is quite diverse, even in the views that he expresses. And Crawford will point that out, that there are times that, he can almost seem to argue both sides of an issue, or because he has changed his position. So the development of his thought, especially when you've got writings going back to the 20s and then all the way up to the end of his life in the late 70s, early 80s, sometimes there are multiple changes, and it may not even.
And that's even the reality of us today, especially if you're saved at a real young age and you start learning and things like that, and then you start changing. And I look at my life, and I look from, and like I said, I've been saved since the age of 4. So even in there, you're looking at as a young, you're learning and things, and then you start changing even that because you learn more. And then I've been going to a Christian school since 4th grade. So you have that along with church and other things that we did, conferences and things like that. Then going off to Bible college and then seminary. And then I actually get out of seminary. And that's when I have to start really getting rid of, starting to really deal with the questions I have and say, okay, let me get out of the, make sure I'm not just indoctrinated with a view and knowing if it's, or what do I really hold to? And of course, I've changed as a result of that too. And this is the reality of us all. As we grow in the Lord and things, we are going to change, and we are going to look at things different. We're not always going to say, I agree with what I grew up on everything. But again, if you are, I will admit, I went back because I got confused. I got into Calvinism. I only was given the choice of Calvinism and Arminianism, and I didn't understand that there can be more than that. And the reality is it made me, as I said, a confused Calvinist. And as a result, I get out of school finally, and I start really studying, looking in and things like that. And I finally shaved off all my Calvinism for the most part. But I'm sure there's still things that linger or creep back in and things because of the old way. But again, I got to keep renewing and understanding again, looking at what God's word actually says. So
If he changes, it also could be that he is very robust in his exegetical engagement. So that, think of it this way, we have this problem all the time where people, if you could preach a sermon from Ephesians, Paul's statement on being saved by grace through faith alone and not of works, and then the next Sunday, if you were to preach through James, somebody would think that you're all over the place. You've changed your position.
You might sound a little different, yeah.
Yeah, right. And so there, especially when we are used to organizing our thoughts according to systems or people or characters. Calvinism, for instance, is one which Crawford points out that he's Calvinistic. And yet, there are certainly limitations to that. Darby would not be a self-described Calvinist. And of course, we quickly gravitate toward these labels. It's because that we say, hey, that's going to show you exactly who I am based on this or that. The brethren would completely eschew all labels. They would.
And that is true. Darby did not like labels. He did not like to be labeled as anything. Even when people, those that were against Darby started calling Darby's followers Darbyites, he didn't like that. Darby actually didn't even like really putting his name, where having his whole name on something. And that's where we get where you may have heard just JND. Because again, instead of putting John Nelson Darby, they went ahead, he got it to where it just be JND. So that, and it was now then recognized that this is Darby. But he actually didn't want to be that, be someone or be put out as boisterous, look at me, things like that. type deal. In fact, he wanted to do more with evangelism and that of sharing the gospel and seeing people grow than even writing, but he understood that writing was a necessary thing. And as a result, he dealt with so many different areas. He dealt with science. He dealt with moral issues. He dealt with history, all these different things. But the one thing he didn't so much, and he may have dealt with more of the moral issues in politics or something like that, but he didn't believe the church should be involved in politics. So you have all that different things going on.
They wouldn't want to be characterized by anyone's thought, and to the extent that these people, other writers of the past, may have influenced him, it would always be tempered by other writers. And I mean, Darby read just prolifically from the patristics, the early church. He actually read more. When you look at who he's ascribing to the ideas, it usually comes out of the first couple centuries of the church more than anybody through the history of the church afterwards, including much closer contemporaries. I mean, he almost never attributes ideas to modern or even. I mean, obviously, he mentions Calvin and Luther several times in his writings, but he always with limits and always at an arm's breadth. So, I mean, that's very important to understand that we are quick to categorize, and he would have done the exact opposite, and that was actually pretty common in his day.
Just to let you know, Darby actually utilized the Lutheran 39 confession, and he kind of more used that in his in dealing with than any of the other Reformed stuff out there. That, and of course, I would say that has more truth in it than the other stuff. I'm not saying in every aspect, but it has more truth. The 39 confession from Luther of the Lutheran,
especially when Calvinist to be a Calvinist would have been, for some, I mean, it was a, especially those in the Church of England at that time, it was a accusation that would kind of label somebody as in discordant from the teaching of the Church of England. And so many of the dissenters were often accused of that. I mean, the forerunner of Darby's was John Walker, and he was also accused of being a Calvinist. He definitely held Calvinist ideas, but he actually made a remark. He said, although I have 9 volumes of Calvin on my shelf, I don't think I've read even as many as 9 pages. And so he says, if I agree with Calvin, it's only because he and I are reading from the same Bible and for no other reason. So I mean, that kind of goes to show the kind of attitudes of those who were in the Church of. And
that's the same thing that happens today. People who are Calvinists don't read Calvin. Now, I didn't read Calvin. I listened to Calvin. The audio, I didn't want to read it, but I listened to him, and I did the 5 books, his Institutes, and in listening and all. But the thing is a lot of your Calvinists never read them. But who are they listening to? Those that are just reiterating the philosophy. And so so it's not that even they're saying they're getting it from the Bible, not so much. Again, it's the culture of the day and that of what they're being told, what they're being there, and they still keep with it. And of course, the good thing is by this time with Darby's era, they weren't killing off each other. So it started to allow for more of a dissent in everything, and to say, well, I'm not going to, but in dealing with that. So it did start opening up, because again, Darby bringing up a dispensational understanding really went against a lot of Reformed thinking. Because again, covenant theology, which is what it eventually was named, is basically Reformed and Roman Catholic thinking in a lot of ways.
Of Ireland at the time, and who were, trying to develop, because what Darby was doing, he was within a line of those who were looking at the limitations of the established Church of England and Ireland at the time, and how they would proceed in their Christian walk outside of that, and the extent to which that needed to be a complete separatist, this leans into why Darby was so unique, being, as Grubin mentions, being Catholic. Obviously not the way we think of a Roman Catholic in any way, but we might use a term like ecumenical. But he wasn't saying, hey, let's all grab hands and erase all distinctions.
Yeah.
But instead he said, let us stand on the basis of the unity of Christ. So even the terms can be very.
And I do agree with that. We have to look for ways of working together as brothers and sisters in the Lord, even though we're different, for where we do the unity. That's very hard to do at sometimes, and working with, especially when we start putting a lot of things in the way to say we're not going to have unity. We're looking more on not having unity than to have unity. And so we look at this and we have to say to ourselves, but again, the idea of first starting off that if we're brothers and sisters in the Lord, we got that unity already together. Now we have to look at how to further it, even though we may not agree and things like that. Now, this does, as he said, this doesn't include the fact that you might have to discipline, excommunicate, put someone under discipline, things like that. We see sometimes that has to be done in the Bible.
Very misleading if we don't really understand the context of Darby's time.
So I guess it takes a lot of that terminology that people throw out, and Ribbon helps you put it into a broader context of what Darby actually believed. And this might play into your book that's going to come out eventually on Darby. At least I'm going to cross my fingers, Lord willing, that you'll get your book out there on Darby. But what do you looking through his book? What was there anything specific that you were like, oh, I wish he would have included this? Anything left out that you would have loved to see in Ribbon's book?
Well, yes, I one of the big things that a lot of people, when you deal with these, you're talking about methodology. Methodology is the most important. I always like to get behind the ideas and think what was driving these ideas. So when you talk about Darby's soteriology, pneumatology, ecclesiology, and eschatology, well, they're all preceded by his methodology, his theological method. And a lot of times what dispensationalists today talk about, or really most Christians, when they realize that we're on different sides of an aisle on just about any issue, we realize that it's a hermeneutical issue. So to really engage what was Darby's hermeneutical approach, what was his methodological, how did he come to these conclusions, would have probably been a really helpful, maybe even a first chapter before jumping into soteriology would have been.
Yeah, that would be nice in writing. But in a previous, or in one that I did listen to, Darby wasn't what we would consider a literal historical grammatical. He did go ahead and look at, for Christology, he looked at that of somewhat, because again, he still took on some of the allegory and things like that and doing. So his time and the time that he was still in was still moving, having a lot of previous things influencing him, and in doing that. Because again, allegory is a very big thing of the Reformation, Roman Catholic, as a due from Origen. And because Origen was the one who finally got that of the allegorical method allowed in the church. But as a result, it did create a lot of things and different things that were happening. So with Darby looking at that, he did some different things, and as a result, I think created some of the ideas that he has too. Now, again, if you have any questions that are being talked about or that I've said or things like that, go ahead and ask in the chat instead of me just talking and us just listening. I know that this is more new, so I understand if you don't have them. But if you have any questions, put it in, put at TOS before. I'll be glad to try to deal with it. Like I said, I'm not a scholar. I don't consider myself a scholar. I just consider myself a layman in this area. I've done some work. I've done some reading. I have a little bit more knowledge than the most common person, but I'm not a scholar. So I could try to help with if you have any questions or things dealing with that. It could be even with the differences or you could say, hey, I heard dispensational holds this. Is this the same? Or how does this work? and I can bring it up where, if I can, with Darby, with Schofield, with Schaefer, with Ryrie, maybe sometimes with the mid-axe. I don't know everything with mid-axe, but I know some things. The least one I would probably know is progressives, because they've went off to a different, like I said, they deal with an integrative hermeneutic, so it's a lot different in thinking than my thinking. So I don't grab a hold of it. I haven't grabbed a hold of everything that they're portraying, but I'll be glad to try.
What was Darby's methodology? But that.
Will you cover that in your book?
No. No, my approach is a little different than his. He was doing a systematic approach. He was actually showing how systematic, even though Darby rejected systems, this systematization, I will say, developed in the late years. So my focus of Darby's developing years is actually on the other side of that. When he was just kind of moving through a lot of different ideas in order to arrive at what he arrived at in 1840. Because by 1840, like I said, 40s is when it had largely coalesced. So my focus was, how did Darby get to that point? What did that journey look like?
So I was going to ask this question later on in the interview, but I'm going to ask it now because I'm curious at the moment. Is there a book on Darby's methodology out there?
No, there's very little written on Darby because it's such a daunting. A lot of people just aren't that concerned. Like I said, even I hate to say that
and he's correct. It really wasn't until Roy Huebner started writing his stuff, and the academic world at that time got egg put on their faces, because what he did was he brought up a thing saying, hey, what current dispensationalism is presenting isn't what Darby actually taught, or everything that Darby taught. So in dealing with that, you have this non-doctorate, someone, he had a master's, but in engineering. But again, you have this lay person coming out and doing this scholarly work and making the scholars look bad. And in doing that, and now we have some others that are presenting some more things about Darby. Like I said, you have the author here, or with Gribbins, you have Fazio, you have Wormchuck, just a small handful of people that are wanting to do this, to give at least something out there, so that now we have a little better idea of who this man, John Nelson Darby, is, just so that when we talk about it, we can actually have an idea of where's the differences, why are we claiming John Nelson Darby as the founder of dispensationalism, when the current dispensationalism really is quite different. And in doing that, if you have any questions, comments, John, glad to have you come in. Just put at TLS, and if not, if you have questions about the current and relating, I'll be glad to try to answer. I can, again, I'm a lay person in this area, but again, I've done a lot of reading and actual from the scholars that dealt with John Nelson Darby.
The title of the book, Jay and Darby and the Roots of Dispensationalism, I think that Roots of Dispensationalism got kind of tacked on there a little bit more because the publisher wanted it, because it sells, rather than because that's really what the book is about. The book is really about the systemization of Darby's ideas, right?
Oh, totally, yeah.
It's really not even engaging that issue. But in other words, the point is the market drives certain factors, in terms of publishing and titles and things like that. And so methodology might be important to a handful of us, but it's not going to sell titles, so it's not really what I'm that there's a challenge there between what we might want to read. We are the few. We have to recognize we're the minority. We're the underrepresented. We're the ones who are, we want to see those things, but somebody else isn't going to do that work and put it out there because it'll sell 5 books.
Yeah, I guess that just frustrates me, because I feel like what defines dispensationalism today is our hermeneutic and methodology of how we approach Scripture. That's what makes a dispensation.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Only a pocket of people are willing to go ahead and deal with the books, deal with this, and doing that. But at the same time, we still need this out there for so at least there's the truth and all. Yeah, John, what we're doing with this is we're dealing with tomorrow. I'm actually going to do a paper on Darby's understanding. In reality, and yes, the interesting thing is he never called himself a dispensationalist, but yes, he started bringing out points, but the points that he brought out were quite different in a lot of areas than what modern dispensational holds today, at least in a lot of the foundational issues of what creates. So it's and this is one of the reasons why we want to bring this out, just so that to recognize that there is where are the similarities, where are the differences, things like that. But the fact is because of the brethren, they have helped to create a lot of influence because of their writings, because of what they did and things like that. And it did go into the other denominations and affected and things like that. So the reality is the brethren, which is now a denominational, though they're still more on the smaller thing, they have done a great influence upon all the other denominations, and they still influence us today in different ways.
Like, because there was a point in my early ministry where I was tired of some of the ridicule I felt like I got for being a dispensationalist, and I kind of wanted to walk away from it, but I couldn't leave the methodology. I couldn't not look at the Bible through the human hermeneutic lens that we do through as dispensationalists. So I sort of begrudgingly was like, I guess I'm going to stay in this group anyways, because I can't see a better way to read the Bible. Like, this is how I want to do it. So I would love to see what Darby's actual methodology was. Yeah. I'm not going to do that work because it's insane. Yeah. The amount you have to go through to figure that out. But I would love somebody like you to do that work, James.
Yeah. It's just not. It's not going to be broadly appreciated. So even if to the extent that you can describe it, you're not going to be able to have a book on it because nobody really wants to read that. Very few want to read that.
And I liked what he said, that even the person who does that, there will be areas that they still cannot really explain it. Because Darby, like I said, one of the things about Darby is he did basically a sentence within a sentence within a sentence within a sentence within a sentence, and it could have been a thought within a thought within a thought. And people complain about Paul and his run-ons. Darby was worse, and it was even worse with the fact of dealing with even his thoughts, because he could be putting a thought in, but then related it and then thinking about another thing and wrote down, because he's not writing really congruent sentences by which we can grab a hold of and things like that. Okay, so True Grace asked, and I'll put this up. Let me go ahead in, because she asked, why do people need to argue against dispensational teaching? Well, again, not everyone holds to the foundation of a literary or literal grammatical historical hermeneutics, whereby we get the literal meaning. So in dealing with that, and even within dispensationalism itself, we don't have agreement. Because again, Darby's understanding, and one of the purposes of bringing this out is showing how Darby's understanding is quite different than today's understanding. Because as you came in late or later here, but earlier I did speak about how there's basically 5 camps today. You have Darby, you have Schofield, you have your mid-late acts, which some are called hyper-dispensational or ultra-dispensational. You then have your revised, which is Ryrie, and now you have your progressives. So even within that, we have our different camps, and underneath the different camps, you have different sects. So there's not a full agreement and even amongst dispensationalists, we're not in agreement on even the foundations. So in dealing with that, that's where there's an argument and thing, because it even starts within our own camp, where we're not in full agreement with one another on on the foundational issues and things like that. Like for me, I don't agree with Darby's sine non quans. That is his basics of what makes a person a dispensationalist. I don't think he and as a result, that allowed for progressive dispensationalism to actually come in, because he lowered the bar so low, it was like, okay, we can squeeze this one in now and just call it. It's bad enough that I would say it's bad enough that the mid and late acts ones are called dispensational because they followed the 7 dispensations. But when it comes to a lot of the foundational aspects and things like that, they're different than regular dispensational. And I'm talking about Darby. I'm talking about probably even your Schofield, your Ryrie, and dealing with those 3 and things like that. So there is all these different things. So, okay, let's go ahead in and.
I probably got like 15 people who watch my channel would probably want to read that book.
Right. That's right. Yeah. No, he's broadly characterized and accurately so as a literalist. Obviously his reading of scripture is very much in line.
Yeah. No, you say that though, James, but then I'm like, after reading Gribben's book, like maybe he really wasn't when I looked at the
No, he wasn't. That's why I say he was broadly characterized that way. But it would, the idea that dispensationalists take today and talking about it's all hermeneutics, it's the grammatical historical method. No, it wasn't for Darby. I mean, that's not it at all. That wasn't it.
I know.
And in fact, his reading of the Old Testament, he tended towards spiritualizing a lot of the Old Testament. I mean, if you saw the way he
if you just heard what Dr. Fazio said, Darby spiritualized a lot of the Old Testament. And I agree with him. Darby still had because again, you're dealing with coming out of the Protestant Reformation, which was still a lot of Catholic, and then dealing with that, and now you're dealing with all these other subjects that weren't dealt with but just dragged over, and in doing that, and so in dealing with that, there is a lot out there to look at, to study. Yeah, True Grace asked people, where she put in, people seem to squabble over silly things. Again, we deal with different maturity, different things like that. Again, sometimes just in the nature of academics, nature of guys, where we like to have those. I mean, I will admit, in seminary, a friend of mine and I, it sounded like we were at each other's throats, but all we were doing was showing our emotions and having fun, explaining our views and all. So again, what we're looking at is that there is, I want to do it more as a teaching. What I'm doing here is more of a teaching to show the difference and all. Now, there are points that we do need to fight over. I think are good things to fight over, like salvation is by grace we're saved through faith, and that not of ourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Definitely a fight over. Again, I would hold that salvation, and this salvation of how to be saved was trans-dispensational. In other words, it's across the board. It started in Genesis 3:15 with the first gospel presentation, for the most part, by Jesus or by God himself, of the promise of his son. And in dealing with that, so there are things that we have to say, and we do see in scripture that are things we do not give up. But then there are other categories that I do believe we have to, that aren't as important, but again, it depends on your areas and things and being able to work together and how you put it together and things like that. So you have to look at it in the different ways. Yeah, I like to use the word transdispensational because, again, most people hold to the seven, and there are things that are dealing with that are more than that are that don't deal aren't started or affected by dispensations. And this will be one of the things we will be discussing tomorrow, because Darby held that you got to understand that there are other things in the Bible, and that don't make him dispensational. And we got to keep those things separate. So and like I said, with salvation, we're dealing with only one real way of one being saved. Now, as the idea of different gospels, yes, there are different gospels, but we got to ask ourselves, what gospel are we talking about then? Is it to that of one getting saved, or is it the gospel of the kingdom, that is the good news to Israel of their promised kingdom? But again, it's dependent upon first, have they actually got saved? Things like that. So need to work with a lot of these different things. So, okay.
You know, I mean, in the New Testament, it's much more the way somebody following grammatical historical approach would handle Scripture today. But he spiritualized much of the Old Testament. He was always looking for Christ or parallels to the Old Testament figures, looking for almost like spiritualizing the text.
Yeah, no, because I guess what's piqued my interest to get a book on his methodology is I got the synopsis of the Bible by Darby. And so I could do a review on it, and so I look at it, fairly regularly. And there are definitely times where I read it and I'm like, that is not a good dispensationalist approach, Darby. So I'd love to see something on any other book. Are there any books that you would recommend on Darby that are out there?
Well, on Darby, if you want to know Darby, I mean, Max Waremchuk's biography is really what started it all for me too, and piqued my interest when I was a teenager. I read his book. It's all the way back to the 80s, or maybe in English it was the early 90s when it was first published. But it's just called John Nelson Darby. And
yeah, and I have this on my reading list. Then I have his latest one, because again, Gribbins did this one. And then Waremchuk just put out a new one, but more dealing with his early years, because that's something a lot of people don't have and trying to grab a hold of, because there's even with trying to grab all the information together as an individual, unless you can get to the original sources, the average person can't grab a hold of that. And so I have both of those. They're on my reading list. So I will eventually get to them, but it's going to be a while and things like that. Because again, like I said, I'm not the fastest reader, and dealing with everything I do, I don't read as much as I used to, just because of fatigue.
And SES Press has produced a updated and expanded, because it went out of print. It was Luzo Brothers, which is a defunct publisher now, but SES Press picked it up and put it out a few years ago now. So that is a very good starting point and a good look. Again, I think Max Waremchuk does a good job looking at the person, his ministry. I mean, I talk about methodology. Another thing is ideas are ideas are important. I'm a historian of ideas, really. I mean, I'm looking at Darby's thought, and that is, so it's important to look at the ideas, but you really need to look at the person and the ministry that they carried out in their life of, what did these ideas motivate him to do? And again, once more, he is such an enigma, and the paradoxical, I mean, he was it once, I think Waremchuk does a good job pointing to some of these features where he was caring, compassionate,
Yeah, just to let you know, some of the things Darby did, even before he actually moved into more of a dispensational, he was more Church of England, dealing with that. He was very concerned about the poor. Now, his early life, he was in a family that was very well off, very well connected. So he was around bigwigs, very esteemed, high people. And his schooling and things like that, he had excellent schooling, and how that all worked and things. But he actually started off where he was looking at law school, but he then went the other direction and went into that of the clergy. Now his older brother went into the clergy also, and that may have been part of the influence and things like that. But as he did that, his ministry, he dealt with a lot of the very poor and things like that, and organizing, helping, giving them the gospel, things like that, and also, but and that's been a lot of his ministry. Now, when he dealt with scholars and people who had ability, I mean, he was brutal to them if they disagreed, and would be really fighting and stuff as to, or pointed and different things. Now, but at the same time, when it came to the uneducated, he showed a lot of mercy. He didn't get into a lot, or he wasn't dealing with the fact of dealing with the scholarly arguments and things like that deal with. He was more dealing with the actions. Yeah. He basically was a missionary in a lot of ways. Because again, what he would do is he would once he even afterwards, when he left after he became more dispensational, and he left his area, went to another place to minister and to share the gospel. And he did that throughout his whole life, going to these. And as he went to different places and all, he also had an ability, because Darby probably more likely was a genius. His IQ was up there because he had the ability to learn and grab a hold of other languages. And so as he did that, not only in his own language, but in other language, he went ahead and he made, he went ahead and created the scriptures, or, did with the scriptures and all, and put in writing into that language for people to have, but because the printing press was there, they could create it, and he tried to do it in such a way that they could get it for just a couple like 5 cents or something like that, not very expensive. He wanted to keep things very cheap, inexpensive, so that the lay people, the poor people, can actually grab a hold of this stuff, and and of course the ones that could read and dealing with this. True Grace asks, I don't understand why churches are new covenant in their understanding when was the church ever under the old covenant? Well, that's part of the issue, and I will be eventually dealing with this, but that's part of the issue of what's taking place right now. The new covenant, of course, is a promise. The question is when did it actually get started? Some say it got started at the cross. Some say, okay, the new covenant got started at when the church came into the body part of the church started to be put into place. So Acts 2. And so what happened is you have the new covenant coming in, and therefore the old covenant has gone away. You got people like me then that more say, no, the new covenant has not been enacted yet. It won't be enacted until the actual literal second coming of Jesus Christ and the establishment of the millennial kingdom. So the Mosaic covenant is still in existence today. Because again, once the new gets established, that's when the old will be done away. So I will, like I said, I have to work on a paper on that. I haven't started it yet. I do have a book that helped me out, and I'll probably use it and kind of do an overview type thing, because as the book is like 300 pages or something, 300 pages, and that's just doing an overview, and it's just to do it presented that way would be too difficult. I mean, but to give an overview, that's what I'm going to have to do of the different views and things like that, so that people can understand. And that's there are different, and even amongst that is because there are, and then there is another group within dispensationalism that says there's actually two new covenants. There's a covenant which is for new covenant for Israel, which hasn't happened, but then there's a new covenant for the church. And so, but it seems like I don't see the church under a covenant. And so it's one of the things. So that's where the other two, those that say the new covenant is for multi-people or users, others say there's two new covenants. They want to put the church under a covenant, but I don't see that we are under a covenant. So but again, even amongst dispensation, and this has always been a discussion, even back in Darby's time, as to when and different views. So this is not a primary issue of dispensational, but it is something that gets discussed. Okay. Got a question here. What are you saying, Kurt, about Darby and the poor, that he just preached to them or gave help practically in some ways? He did both. Again, he would organize things, help to organize. He himself may not have given certain things, but he would help with the organization, in helping, bringing money for the poor, those that were rich to help out the poor, things like that, and get those type of things. But he because after his parents died, he was given a stipends that was enough that allowed him to travel and things. But again, he didn't have an elaborate wealth, but he had more than most, which allowed him to do all this traveling and all. So he didn't have the money to just give away, but at the same time, when he went to places, he organized things for those that do have to think of the poor, and having that to help out and create things like that. So, hello, Christ is the truth. Glad you're here. So that's part of what Darby did on his missionary. In a little way, he may have been. Again, we see that in the Catholic Church. We saw that with some of the Protestant Reformation churches. We even see that within today's doing the churches that send out missionaries and in dealing with that. But then we do see others where they don't do anything to actually help the poor. All they do is go in and give the gospel. So it just depends. Okay, let's go on.
Extend himself to the needy or to the underprivileged. But at the same time, he was really a vigorous fighter when he was dealing with an equal. He would lock horns with anybody who, could go toe to toe with him. I mean, the beast came out, sort of the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, in ministry context. Anytime he seemed to be ministering to and he also had a social standing, and his family was certainly the gentry class, being an Anglo-Irishman, raised in a castle. I mean, family had even land and in the new world in America, there was all kinds of wealth. They came from a privileged position. So interestingly, he didn't use that as many would think to, lord it over underlings. In fact, he would serve the poor Catholics. I mean, he was just known for his charity toward those who he regarded as lower in social status, but he was a bear to anyone who was equal or higher. He took that.
Okay, just like I said. So Dr. Fazio just again backed me up, and but again, I got it from him. I got it from Gribbons. I got it from I haven't got it from what's Whitechett or the other one, but I haven't read his book yet. But in doing that, Simon goes, at least at least Darby didn't have his theological opponents killed off like Calvin did. Well, again, you got to remember, things changed by that time. They quit all the killing of one another over theology. Now, I'm not saying that there's probably a lot that want to bring it back, but but I'm glad that they quit that, because because again, that's when basically the Protestant Reformation ended, and when it ended, so did the killings and things like that. But we got to remember that these type of killings was happening under the Roman Catholic Church also. They were killing off their enemies and things like that. And you still have the whole, in Ireland, the Catholic Protestant conflict that's going there. And in some places, you still have them where they're at each other's throats and things like that. See if there's any questions here. Okay, yeah. As Charles put in, and next debate is with Will Kinney on August 17th, and this is his discussion, King James onlyism and things like that. While we're at this, Charles will not be doing anything tonight, so it's just this, and then we will be done for the night. But you never know with Charles. He says, I'm not going to do anything, the normal stuff, but he stays up. And then if he can't go to sleep or whatever, he may go ahead and start a program and do something and things like that. It's always interesting for me. I wake up and I look in and I say, well, Charles did something else, because he does a lot of things in dealing with at night because of his schedule and things like that. Simon goes ahead and says, Ireland is more complicated by Northern Ireland territorial disputes. Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff in it. I mean, my first, what was it? Again, with you got the flag itself where you have the green is for Ireland, orange is for Protestant, white is for Druidism, which is the three main religions in Ireland. Of course, you have the whole thing of St. Paddy coming into Ireland and then doing that. So again, you have St. Patrick's Day. Of course, that's a day for excuse to get drunk and get into fights, things like that. All these different things that they do. Okay, let's continue on.
And the task.
So Weirm Chuck shows us about Darby. Anything else to recommend, or is that?
Well, I would suggest if you want to know Darby's thought, as opposed to just knowing about Darby himself, there's nothing better to read than Roy Huebner. Huebner is the way for anybody who's wanting to understand how Darby thought. I really wouldn't recommend to anybody who's not ready to commit their life to the study of Darby. I wouldn't really even recommend reading Darby. If you want to know Darby's thought, read Huebner, Roy Huebner. And
And Roy Huebner is the one that I am going to be presenting tomorrow. I'm going to start with his 9 overviews of Darby's thinking and stuff, and of where it turns into dispensationalism and in dealing with that. So that's what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. Again, 7:30 Eastern, which is my time, 6:30 Central, and in doing that way. So and I didn't really know the orange and the white until, what was it, seminary, actually. I was in a church and we were doing this thing, and it was, I guess, for St. Patrick's Day. And of course, we're all coming in our green because again, you're supposed to wear green. But another group, or one family, came in orange. And it's like, okay, so what's going on here? And he told me, because he is from Ireland, and he told me about, no, orange is for Protestant, green is for Catholic, and white is for that of Druid. Because again, Druidism was the religion before these other things, before St. Patrick came in and in dealing with. And that's where, if you watch a lot of things, especially dealing with, you'll see a lot of Druidism and things. And that is more coming from the Ireland area and others and surrounding that were part of Druidism. So yes, you get to William of Orange. Yeah, you get some history with this stuff too. I'm not the greatest in history, but I do like it. I like to dabble.
That's actually the best place to start. It's available online PDF. You can get a lot of his work. It's also available in print.
I'll look up the link to that.
And again, BibleTruthPublishers.com. That's the brethren website I mentioned at the very front. That deals with a lot of, they provide a lot of Huebner's books free. If I would encourage you, at least if you are interested in this, do Elements of Dispensationalism, Volume 1, the first 50 pages. And that will give you a good understanding of Darby and his systematized and that of where he does not fit with Schofield, he does not fit with progressivism, does not fit with your mid or late Acts dispensationalist in dealing with that.
For anybody who's watching, put in the description below, so you can find that. So we got Huebner, we got Wormcheck, and then we got Gribben. Do you have any issues with Gribben's overall portrayal of Darby? Did you take any issue with any big picture things he might have brought out about him?
No, like I said, there's it's just if you don't understand. So like he really, you pointed this out in your review that he did this kind of a few times. Gribben mentioned that he was Catholic, he was Calvinist, Catholic, charismatic, and catastrophic. And I think that he was kind of doing that along with the Calvinist in terms of soteriology, Catholic in terms of ecclesiology, charismatic in terms of pneumatology, and catastrophic in terms of ecclesiology. So my point is that those are.
Yeah, and in our last one, I think it was our last one, with the catastrophic, he was trying to find it where we're keeping with the C's, because if you notice, he alliterated with all C's. And in dealing with that,
maybe helpful labels, but sometimes the labels can get in the way because I don't think that they don't say enough. And he also doesn't leave it there. He leaves those he presents those as headings, but if you don't scratch under the surface, you won't see that Darby, as I think I said earlier, Darby did not. He wouldn't have characterized himself as a Calvinist. He wouldn't have used that label. He would refer to himself as a biblicist, and he even.
Okay. Got a question and probably fits right in with what we're dealing with right now. It says, where's the modern day Ryrie and Pentecost and Wolvert on dispensationalism? Well, we have a new set of people that are coming up. You have Dr. Fazio, he in writing the book. You have others that have written other books, and we did discuss it a little bit more at the front, like Discovering Dispensationalism, which Dr. Fazio was a part of. You have other books that are coming out that are more dealing with these things. So we do have a group of people coming, but what has happened is within academic realm, dispensationalism is on the outs right now. So it's very hard for them to get published. They have to deal with other type of publishers. And so in dealing with, they don't get the full scholarly where people really see it and things like that. Also the fact of that a lot of your churches have moved away from being dispensational. They don't even understand what this being dispensation is. And when you get someone like John MacArthur, who calls himself a hyper dispensationalist, or a leaky dispensationalist. It's leaky dispensationalist. And I put it this way: a little dispensational has leaked into his covenant theology, because he's more of a covenant theology overall than he is he's more of a futurist, because he, again, seeing a distinction between Israel and the church, therefore creating a future. But it's not that he really is a dispensational, in my opinion. Now, again, the school may be, but John MacArthur himself is not a dispensationalist, because again, end times things is not always the key thing. The key thing of dispensationalism is dealing with the administration and what is exactly happening, and in dealing with that, it's not just being focused on end times and even the millennial. But again, from dispensation, you do look at that. But if that's all you're looking at and you're not looking at the other things, you really aren't presenting yourself as a dispensationalist. You're presenting yourself as a futurist. And even as a futurist, you can have different views within the rapture, because again, right now you have the pre-trib, mid-trib, you have the pre-wrath, and then you have post-trib. So, and then dealing with the millennial, you could deal with, okay, is there still a distinction between the church and Israel? And how does it all work? Things like that. And in dealing with that. So there's a lot of little different things. So there are people out there writing. There are people out there going to churches and teaching. But again, there's not as many churches that are accepting it. Therefore, they're not always that well known and things like that. It's people who are actually studying and dealing with dispensationalism kind of know of these people. Now, the problem is when it comes to names, I'm bad at names. So I'm having trouble naming off all the different ones because I'm just bad at that. Okay, let's see. Just seems like there's no modern day updates on Ryrie's dispensational today. There isn't. If you're wanting your because like I said, where you're more seeing is proving the dispensational ideas down throughout history. That's where more of them are coming from. They're going to more of a thing to say, hey, this isn't a new idea. These aren't new ideas. So that's what is more happening today. So the scholarship is not going so much into what the whole dispensational idea, but it's more going into were the ideas presented and were they held before even Darby came and grabbed a hold of them. Because today, we don't say Darby is the author of dispensationalism. What we do is we say that Darby is the one that brought it to help to start bringing things together, which now we then systematized. Because Darby didn't even systematize it. Nicholas goes ahead and he puts in, how would you go about disseminating dispensational to the youth? Well, again, I would deal with it where I would start with probably, again, the hermeneutic aspect. Then I would deal with what is a dispensationalist? What is a dispensation? Of course, where I hold to dispensation is looking at the word dispensation in the scriptures. There's only 10 spots and getting the understanding. And from that, in basically the New Testament, the word helps get the understanding of what I said at the beginning of that God has house laws or administrative laws for a certain, for whatever group he's working with or dealing with or things like that, whether it could be the whole world or in dealing, or you could go and deal with But I hold that dispensations, I only hold to the 3 dispensations that are clearly mentioned in Scripture. Simon goes ahead and he writes and says, I see the Pre-Trib Research Center talking quite a bit about finding elements of dispensation in early writings, often in foreign language. Yes, and that's part of the whole discovering dispensationalism also deals with. And then you got these other elements. So that's where we're more right now, is proving that the different thoughts are things that are not new. See, everyone, what's happened is a lot of people are saying, well, your dispensationalism is only 200 years old. So it's new, it's not, it doesn't, but the fact is if you're able to take the ideas and show it throughout history, then you can say, no, we've been around. We've been from the very beginning. Also, the different ideas being talked about and things like that. It's the same way with like free grace. You have Augustine in one of his books that he wrote about a group that he thought was heretical, that believed in when a person is initially saved, they're saved forever. Where the majority of the church, and especially in the majority of where the church did, they always held to some type of perseverance. It hasn't been until recently that, from Calvinism, you have the once saved, always saved first, but again, that they're only talking about the true elect. And then later you have the actual more coming in, which is eternal security, which goes more into free grace. And then you have free grace coming up. So the ideas have been out there. It's just never been widely accepted. And it's still not widely accepted in doing that. Okay. And someone asked, do you have must-read books? Yes. The must-read book, and you can get it from free downloading, is Elements of Dispensational Truth 1 by Roy Huebner, at least the first 50 pages of what he wrote. If you're wanting more of the Schofield understanding and things like that, Schofield wrote a book. I can't remember what the name is. If you want Ryrie, you got his dispensational book. You would get that, but it's more of a regurgitation of Schofield. So if you just want to get one, I'd get the Ryrie one than any others. Again, this will give you the different understanding that is out there. Again, the Roy Huebner one is more of where I more lean to in a lot of ways in understanding. So, okay, let's go ahead and see about going a little further.
In his writings, points to areas where he would differ with Calvin, or even much of what is Calvinism would differ with Calvin, his reading of Calvin. So, I think I've got a quote here. I think I told you, on the presence and action of the Holy Ghost. He said, let me see, those who led by the Holy Ghost have searched the Word, have, while following the Word and the principles and truths that Calvin himself found there, found themselves outside his system in several particulars. They followed the Word and not the system. I mean, in other words, he's not trying to follow a Calvinistic system. He's trying to follow the Word, and that lends itself toward what I'd said earlier about a predecessor of Darby's, John Walker, another somebody in a very similar situation in Ireland, in Trinity, at the time when Darby was a student there, and he made the statement of, I don't read Calvin, but I'm frequently accused of holding to his ideas.
Yeah, the thing is it would be nice if the Reformed were a little bit more lenient like they used to be, because they did have people who were considered Calvinists, but they weren't agreeing in every point. One of the things one of the key things is dealing with the phantom covenants that covenant theology puts out, which is the covenant of works and the covenant of grace, and then some will do the covenant of redemption, but most hold to the first two. Basically, what happened is Darby actually denied the covenant of works. He accepted the covenant of grace. See, I deny both because I don't see either one of them in Scripture, because the Scriptures clearly say what is a covenant, and you don't ever find a covenant called the covenant of works or the covenant of grace. That's why I call them phantom, or you could call them fake covenants, because it's just not there. I know they have the verses, and they try to say, well, this verse, this, but it never says it's a covenant. And because of that, that's why I would say it's a phantom covenant. They and their whole thing is based on that. And since it is based on that, it's started on a false premise. Okay. Simon writes, I don't hold out any hope for anything from Reformed Brethren. It's more like a cult to me. And there, for the most part, I agree. But those that are truly seeking and things like that, and doing elements of dispensational truth by Roy Huebner. That's RoyHuebner. You can find it at give me a sec here. You can find it at presentTruthPublishers.com. And like I said, it's a free download. Now, there's a lot more other stuff there too. But if you're going to start off with at least one, I would start off with Elements of Dispensational Truth, Volume 1. There's 5 volumes on that one. And then if you look at it, he puts a lot more. Roy Huebner has written a lot of stuff than just that. So, yeah, I went ahead and before the family made it free, I actually bought the book back in what was it, 2009, I think it might have been. And now they have it free. I'm like, man, I wish I could have got the free. But I use the free one a lot because I downloaded already the PDF, and it's easier to cut and paste and things like that if I need to. Okay, let's move on.
But that, just recognize that we're taking an exegetical approach to Scripture. That's what we're doing. Now, Calvinists have since systematized, just as dispensationalists have systematized dispensationalism, and then we look back on it and say, this system of dispensationalism is not what Darby taught, and I think much of the system of Calvinism is not what John Calvin taught.
So I guess you would probably say the overall issue with Gribben would not be actually what he wrote in the details, but it would be maybe somebody taking those headings and being like, oh, I already know what those headings mean. So I know how to define Darby,
right.
Not looking at the details.
Right. Yeah. And even the presentation, I mean, is very spot on in everything he says, but he's also pushing back. So bear in mind, right, I mentioned earlier, mischaracterizations of Darby are that, a common one, soteriologically, one of the biggest mischaracterizations is that he was heretical in his soteriology. The Darby soteriology, that he believes in different ways of salvation for the different peoples of God. That Darby bifurcated the peoples of God and said, this people get saved in this way, different people get saved in this way. He didn't draw out any, and there was, I think, perhaps a missed opportunity, because I would have tackled that head on. And of course, I think he knows that I do tackle that head on. So he might have saved that for me to make that clear. But there are numerous places where Darby refutes that statement. He makes it abundantly clear he does not hold to that position.
I think now that you said that, I think one, I don't know if long-term it would not matter, or maybe it's just in the moment, but it does not seem like Gribben explicitly was interested in saying, here's mischaracterizations, I'm going to correct them. He was more just presenting Darby and then allowing that naturally to take care of it.
That's right. And I and so I take a very different approach in my presentation of it. I like to say, because again,
and that's the thing is, Dr. Fazio is a dispensationalist, so he's looking at different things too, where Gribben is a historian. He won't call himself a dispensational. He's a historian, and so he's just looking at putting out certain facts and things like that. So and same with the other guy, and and Roy Huebner and how they had their different ways of looking at things, and that's why there is all these differences in doing. Okay.
Angle is Darby is unknown and well known, and so the point is these are all the things that people think they know about Darby, and they're wrong on all of them. And so I think his purpose of simply saying Darby was Calvinist was to say who today can say Darby's critics today would say Darby holds to unorthodox or even heterodox or heretical soteriology. That's the accusation of critics, of Darby's critics, and without even taking that challenge at all, Gribben has simply showed how Darby is within the stream of Calvinist thought. Now, that's kind of the way I would put it. He's within the stream of Calvinist thought. Now, I know today there are 5-point Calvinists that would call 4-point Calvinists non-Calvinistic, and so on and so forth, right? So you realize that the system takes a life of its own, but in fact, it's absolutely orthodox soteriology, and that's his point on all of those. Now, I mean, charismatic.
Yeah, and again, like I said at the beginning or in earlier several times, Darby always held that salvation has always been by grace, we're saved through faith. He held that in dealing with, and it was never a dispensational working. The ones that really make an emphasis of that one are usually your hyper, ultra, mid-late Acts people, and trying to say there's different ways of salvation, or two ways of salvation that they usually say.
Again, in many ways, a gross overstatement. Now, he expands on it in a very good way.
Oh, yeah. No, like I said in my review, I hit the charismatic and I was like, oh, I'm not going to like this. But then I loved it. So,
yeah. So all of those things need to be, tempered, but he does in the chapters. But even though, once again, what I'm saying is even when you read the chapter, sometimes it's pushing back on a thing so hard that it maybe doesn't present the full well-rounded picture of it. It's just saying, hey, here's the thing you didn't know. Look at how much,
look how wrong you are.
Yeah. And his, being not a strict cessationist is important, but then again, neither was Calvin, right? So saying,
yeah, and that is true. Darby was not a cessationist. Neither was Calvin. The fact is the cessational idea has only been around for like 100, 120 years. Before that, the church as a whole, for the most part, were continuous. Now, with doing this book, 2,000 Years of Charismatic Christianity by Eddie L. Hyatt, he goes through showing a lot of the different things of when some of the gifts, sign gifts and things were used. Again, he doesn't really decipher if it was really true or not. But Darby would, where a lot of people accuse that he got the rapture idea from the girl that was speaking in tongues flopping around. He actually went to that thing, saw what was happening, and he came away and said, this is not of God. This is not the this is not the gift of tongues. And he basically condemned what that girl was doing. So, but a lot of people will say, oh, he got it from there because he went there. But no, he did not. But he also, as with a lot of, and what influence is because he saw that the church was the ruin of the church, that when you're dealing with how the church is, we don't have the gifts for the most, or we may not have gifts in different areas. And what is also showing is that when the church gets more organized and that are relying more on the organization and not the spirit, it seems like they're not seeing the gifts, the more miraculous gifts being used and stuff, because again, those church aren't looking for it. They're not relying on the Holy Spirit, things like that, for the miraculous part to happen, or the charismatic part to happen, and things like that. So again, when dealing with that, that's another issue of dealing with. Okay, Simon wrote, I think dispensational needs a Lotus type treatment Maybe you should come up with an acronym for it. Nope, will not do it. I do not like the whole acronym things. I don't even care for the Lotus part. It's still too Calvinist. It's relating to and doing that. And the reality is I don't think we can, because we really don't agree on the foundations enough to create it. So that's one of the things. But I understand having something more simpler to say this, and this. But dispensationalism is a lot more complicated and not able to really do that. But the one thing we do have is charts. We love charts. And in fact, I will be showing some charts and things like that tomorrow in my presentation over Roy Huebner's understanding that actually Roy Huebner did, to kind of give us better help of understanding the basic overview or principles of where Darby was thinking when it came to dispensationalism. Of course, he never held the term. He never held him as a dispensationalist. Yeah, I understand. Again, that's part of the thing is because we don't have quite a thing. It does give some idea of what a dispensationalism is, but until we actually millennium envoy, we don't know until we can actually get to a place where we actually talk with the person. Because like I was saying earlier, John MacArthur calls himself a leaky dispensationalist. I don't call him a dispensationalist. He's a futurist, because he doesn't really hold to the administrations or the dispensations. He only holds to a future thing and understands that Israel and the church are separate, and the future aspect. He's not holding to the administrative aspects. So in doing that, okay. Yeah, I've only seen 7H charts. I understand we will be dealing with 3H charts, which deals with Darby tomorrow. But I still don't quite agree on. There's one that he says I disagree with that, and then he doesn't include one that I would include. So I'm still at the 3. But I'd still differ. But I agree with him on the fact that once it starts, it's basically going to go until the end of the millennial. Because again, when the destruction of this universe and then the creation of the new heaven and new earth, you're not dealing with dispensations anymore, because we're dealing with under a whole different thing. Okay. Millennial asks, what are the essential positions of it? We will not be getting into that tonight. That will be more tomorrow, where I can then deal with more of the 2 different ones and things like that, or the different camps and things like that, where and upon the questions being asked. Because again, even though I'm going to be presenting, it's going to be an interactive. So I want questions, things like that, because again, it's more for an educational type thing. And Simon writes, I'm assuming Ryrie was 7H. Yeah, he just basically regurgitated Schofield. So if that's what Ryrie did, was regurgitated Schofield's ideas. Okay, let's go on.
Not a strict cessationist as it's defined today. Calvin wasn't, Darby wasn't, and yet you say, did he believe in tongues and, and all these miraculous demonstrations? No, he did not. So he actually was on the other side of Edward Irving and those who were doing these, manifestations and saying these are not adequate representations of the Spirit today. So, so again, you'd say what we know about charismatic, usually the first thing that comes to our mind is, a glossolalia phenomenon where people are, or something like that. And we say, no, he would have absolutely rejected, he did absolutely reject it. He refuted it, and those who practice those things, and so you've got to take a tempered approach to those. Mm-hmm.
So the book, Gribben's book looked at.
But I did read in it that Darby did also see the miraculous happen, miracles happening and things like that. But again, when you're dealing with a girl flopping on the ground, speaking in tongues, things like that, that you're dealing with something that is, Darby was like saying, no, not at all. And I think we need to be very careful because, again, we see, again, that happening where Azusa Street, which started the modern charismatic movement. And then we have a lot of the stuff we see on TV or on videos and things like that. And a lot of charlatans, and how they are not actually first going before their church, where they're and that of being vetted and things like that, to say, is this correct or is this not? Is because a lot of these ones then are so vague, they don't mean nothing. They, or if they do say something, it's usually something you can grab a hold of because you're reading the newspaper. And you can do, a lot of them are trying to get on the stage to say, oh, I'm a national prophet. I can do things for what's going to happen in the world and things like that. And even in the scriptures, you don't see a lot of those. What you see is most of them are on a local basis. And in the Old and New Testament, it wasn't. Only a handful are actually on a large or a national basis, or a world, talking about the whole world or dealing with that. So you're even in scripture, a lot of what we see today in the charismatic movement and Pentecostal, the scriptures do speak against. One of the things I like to listen to is Remnant Radio, and because they themselves judge and a lot of these things and stuff like that. And they do, every year they bring out a thing about these different ones doing this national thing and all, for the new year. And of course, they've been doing it since, I think, 2017 or maybe it's a little bit later. No, 2020 and something like that. And all of them, not a single thing that these idiots said have come true. And so I write on them and all. I'm like, yeah, another year of discouraging prophecy. Because again, I think that these ones are what's fault. If you're going to do it, you need to be getting those that are actually true and showing that. But that's, even though if they tape it and all, they don't really share those that much of the true, what are the true things that are happening. Yeah, false signs make merchandise of people. Yeah, a lot of it is about getting money. I agree. Okay, let's go on.
At 4 areas of theology, as we've said. He looked at soteriology, ecclesiology, pneumatology, eschatology. Now, if he got done with those 4, James, and he said, all right, I got 4 areas of systematic theology I've covered. I want to do a 5th, but I'm not sure what to do. You can write the 5th one. What area of systematic theology would you want to cover next for Darby that you think would next be the most important?
Well, I maybe go back to something I said earlier. I think hermeneutical, rather than another area of theology, bibliology, which might include hermeneutics, his approach to scripture. The point is, that's not an area where he's been, in terms of his regard for the word, that's much more well known. His hermeneutics is much less known, and his theological method is entirely unknown. I think I would really go back to it and write a first chapter is what I would do, and I would kind of lay the foundation for it before jumping into soteriology with theological method and hermeneutic and his approach to scripture and those kind of things. I think that would best serve the book if I were to add another chapter.
So bibliology focusing on his hermeneutic.
Yeah, I would definitely buy that book, but again, this is an area I like and things like that, and wanting to know more about Darby, because again, I grew up knowing about Schofield. I knew Schaefer, I knew Ryrie, and dealing with that and stuff. So now I'm trying to understand Darby, because again, I can understand the others, but again, I grew up with the Schofield Bible. I grew up with Ryrie's Bible. I grew up with Ryrie's his dispensational book. These different things. I have the seven volumes of Schaeffer's Systematic Theology on my shelf here. I had the 4 volume, but I gave it away because since I had the 7, I let someone, a young kid that was showing in doing, I gave that to him for his growth and things like that, since he was heading into Bible college and in doing that. So yeah, let's see. Millennial Envoy states that this Fazio is the first guy I've seen who has a bookshelf background with very, very deep layers. Yeah, you never know. The thing is you can have. I mean, the problem is you can do backgrounds. So it could be just the background being shown rather than this. Now, you can tell mine is my apartment because you would never have a background this haphazard organized and stuff like that. But this is all I can do. And I don't want to put the extra where doing a background on this computer and all, because I don't know what it might do and stuff like that. Okay, let's see. Simon says, I have a letter from Pentecost after a reply to me when I wrote to him in the late 80s. That's okay. That's your claim to fame with Pentecost. Yeah. What was it? What's his other partner? Whitcomb. Because Whitcomb actually came to my college, Spurgeon Baptist Bible College, and he did our prophecy conference. Because every year, again, they would do a prophecy conference, and it was quite interesting. He was very dull, but at least the material he brought was very, very good and all. But it was interesting because, again, we're singing Crown Him with Many Crowns. That was our opening thing. And, of course, he's like, here we're doing a dispensational prophecy or dispensational prophecy conference, and our first song is a covenant theological song. And I just laughed because, again, that's what happens. We don't really think of the songs that we're singing a lot of times. They're just something we do, and it's good to have. Let's see. Nicholas says there's got to be someone out of the 800 billion plus that has the answer. You mean with the? Yeah. Well, there are things as to in dealing with kind of the basics and stuff. Again, when you read the different ones, Ryrie gives the basics. Again, they deal with the 7 ages and what makes that up. Ryrie or Darby, he's more he'll give his ideas of, again, the 3 and what makes that up, which we will deal with tomorrow. So you do have these different ones, and then so there is some basics and stuff, but then you have Ryrie coming out with the Sin Non Quans, which I think are too little to say, okay, if you hold these 3, then you can be a dispensation. I don't think that's the answer either. I think you do need to hold the fact of some other things besides what the Sin Non Quans stated. So let's go on.
Hermeneutic, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes in most works of systematic theology, we almost refer to it as a prolegomena, right? Like before we go into the theology, let's look at the background, the theological method, the approach to scripture, how he's arriving at these conclusions. That I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. No, it would have been. But thankful for what we got, even if that chapter's missing. So we've talked about some common mischaracterizations that people have from Darby. And I feel like what we've brought out for the most part so far have been I hate dispensationalism so much that I'm going to talk about how Darby was a heretic. Like, I'm using these things with Darby that I'll bring out to just totally dismiss the whole dispensation. But if we were to talk among dispensationalism, so James, like you think for a moment about conversations that you have with other dispensationalists who are in the group, they have a positive overall view of James Darby, probably, even if they don't know him well. What do you think among dispensationalists is the place where we get Darby wrong most often today. Like that thing that like somebody you would love, like somebody like something that.
It's asked, I wonder if Darby would have been free grace today. I can't say yay or nay on this one. I have to read more. Again, I think a lot of, because again, you got to remember in free grace, we do have Calvinists, but they change up things. And I would have to even deal more with that of what did Ryrie changed up when it comes to his actual gospel message. Now, under this book here, it more dealt with the idea of him being a Calvinist, not really the message he preached. So I haven't come across the clear thing that said what did he actually preach in dealing with the gospel. So I don't know if he would have really fit in with free grace, or if he would have, at least in some ways. Overall, he probably won it, because again, he didn't want to be a part of any organized group, things like that. And then, of course, free grace has moved over now. And if he, so he probably would ostracize us just because we're a group. But I don't, again, I would have to look and see more of what's going on with what he actually preached, because I haven't come across that yet. I'm dealt with his dispensational, but I haven't actually seen anything of to what was his actual gospel message. Okay. I have Hudson says, I asked Fred, which was a guy who up further, what was it, from Fred Sanders, a Biola professor who studied and written on the Trinity, goes ahead and said, this is from up above. He says, know if any dispensational writing a book on the doctrine of the Trinity. He told me he knows of no book on Trinity written by dispensationalists. And there may not be, but again, that doesn't mean we don't hold to it. We would recommend those books out there. So we may have seen that, okay, we're not going to deal with, or someone's not interested in writing that book or whatever, because there's already good books out there. And that's part of the whole thing when it comes to writing and stuff is, are you going to deal with something where you could just reiterate what's been said, or is it something you can bring differently? And if you can bring it differently, then you might be able to, but a lot of people are, then you can get published. But again, a lot of people want to write stuff and get published and hopefully sell a lot so that they can actually make some money. But a lot of your professors in schools will write stuff because they have to be published, but they're not going to do it for the money. They're going to do it for their, but for them to remain a professor at a school or something like that. Okay.
That maybe somebody like Corey Marsh would say about Darby, and you'd be like, "Oh, Corey, yeah, it's not quite right." So somebody in our camp that would get something wrong. Where do you think most often people get things wrong about Darby today?
Well, Darby's dispensational scheme was entirely different than what we imagine as we, the charts and everything like that. The successive dispensations of, one ends and another one begins is not at all the framework that Darby was working in. You might say concentric dispensations for him, or parallel dispensations. He had a dispensation of Israel that was synonymous. It was going on at the same time with the dispensation of the Gentiles. And by that, I mean like the Nebuchadnezzar's image. So in other words, when we talk about two peoples of God, we often hear, two peoples of God in terms of criticizing.
Okay. And even with this, Dr. Fazio and what he's mentioning, the problem is Darby will use the word dispensation, but it's used with different meanings. And that's part of what needs to be understood also. Because again, when he's talking about, there's certain, again, when it comes to dispensation, Darby more hold that the dispensationalists was for Israel only, but I don't hold to that myself. But then also he used the word dispensation as with other things, but not really dealing with the idea of what what actually dispensation is, like dispensation of government, dispensation of the Mosaic Law, uh, dispensation of the millennial kingdom, that type thing is in dealing with. But what he's talking about is the Gentiles. You have the times of the Gentiles, and I'll kind of show that tomorrow also, which is not a dispensation. And there's areas I'd like to see more that I haven't with it that Darby does not answer or have not seen answers on. So again, I have to go beyond or disagree with areas and things like that. And so it's just the reality of dealing with these different things.
Darby, the Israel of the church. Well, Darby also very much accounted for the Gentiles and the Gentile dispensation, not as the church, but as the church being neither Jew nor Gentile, but a new creation. So now you've got a third people, which never comes into the consideration of dispensationalists today. What about God's program for the Gentiles? And dispensationalists would almost to the man wrap that up with, well, the church is the dispensation of the Gentiles. No, the times of the Gentiles, goes all the way back to Daniel's image, the successive kingdoms. God was dealing with the Gentiles in a way distinct from the Jews, and then the church being an altogether different thing, which is why Darby ultimately doesn't even regard the church as a dispensation at all, which is, so you realize his scheme is very different, and his perception of what dispensationalism is quite different than what dispensationalists do today.
So this is something,
and that is true. And like I said, tomorrow we'll be discussing more of that and focusing really more on what he's saying here. And again, I have to do what, like with everyone, I have to look at it, glean it, and say, okay, what can I see is actually scripture? What do I not see that is not scripture? What brings conflicts, things like that. And so again, it's a matter of, and that's why I can say there's things I agree with, things I do not agree with when it comes to Darby. And when we deal with just the overview, I'm going to deal with some of those areas and basically show my understanding. But then, like I said, I could deal with maybe even Schofield. I can deal with Ryrie and sharing some of those things.
So something that caught me by surprise in the book when Gribben said that the church wouldn't be a dispensation.
Yeah.
What would Darby say it is instead of being a dispensation?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it comes down to what his definition of a dispensation is. Again, we look at epochs, right? Again, and then dispensationalists had to, in the generation after him in the early 1900s, dispensationalists found themselves really having to argue against dispensations being ages and said, oh, wait, let me clarify. Dispensations take place during time, but they're not defined by time. And yet the reason they had to push back so hard on that is because they had effectively created a history of time that you could just lay out there that is entirely successive. One dispensation starts at the beginning of time, it continues until the next one starts, which continues to the next one starts, and it goes right up until the end of time. So in effect, dispensationalists are arguing, no, it's not time. But really, the way that scheme works, it is time. Darby realizes that they were stewardships. You could have a stewardship at the same time I have a stewardship. We could have two stewardships going on earth right now, or three stewardships. And that is that, after all, what a dispensation is. What has God given you to do?
Yeah, one of the issues is the idea of ages. And it's through Schofield's definition, we get the idea of age. And so I kind of agree with Huebner and all, and we're going with, I just basically then say it's Schofield's dispensational is more of an ageism scheme. And of course, the word dispensation doesn't deal with an age. Ages are different in scripture. And so that's where some of the conflict and all happens between the two systems.
What has God given Israel to do, and what has God given for the Gentiles? And then also he gets into governments and the way governments, where there isn't an administration, which is why he doesn't have dispensations going all the way back to Adam in the garden. And so the church itself, because there isn't government, it's a spiritual entity. And
as he mentioned, the word government is going to be a key aspect of what starts a new, or what starts a dispensation in Darby's understanding, or even a consecutive dispensation, and in dealing with that.
That it doesn't properly constitute a dispensation as he defined it. He says the dispensations properly begin with Noah.
And then would if they can be like multiple ones layered on top of each other because we all have different stewardships, does that mean because of what started in Noah never stopped? Like we're still under the Noahic dispensation covenant? Like is that still, would that be more how you look at it? Like that's still
he doesn't elaborate on that, but I mean but I think then he mentions the promise with Abraham. I mean, so you've got government.
Okay, yeah. See, with Gribben, he doesn't mention that part in things. It's under Roy Huebner that you now get the differences and all. And there was one within the last one we mentioned about prophet, priest, and king. Well, I kind of got a little bit of an answer in dealing with this one here, where again he used the word as a dispensation, but he was using it differently than what he was actually saying is a dispensation. So again, like I said, Darby, you had to really study and try to figure out what definition of dispensation was he using.
Beginning with Noah and promise with Abraham, but you're right. Any other dispensations would say it stops with Noah. Well, why on earth would it stop with Abraham? Why would it stop with Abraham, right? I mean, government continues to the very end. So that does show, and he doesn't outline that. He doesn't exactly explain that, but he certainly doesn't suggest that it stops. He just says that a new one begins. And so
I almost picture this aged Irish guy, like if Darby came into one of the churches and we were talking about the 7 dispensations, and if somebody had a chart on the board, he'd walk in and be like this curmudgeonly old Irish guy, like, you're getting it all wrong. And he'd go tear it all. That's probably terrible Scottish accent instead. And he'd just rip it all down and be like, this is the worst. Like, this isn't the, you don't got it right at all. Like, is that kind of what he'd probably be like?
Totally. But beyond that, he would be, I'm sure, tremendously troubled that we're bothering with charts right now when the church is in such a mess. Because that's really what he cares about, is the testimony of the Spirit on earth. The fact that his and Crawford points this out. I mean, North America really picked up on his dispensationalism more than I mean, his ecclesiology with the brethren continued overseas, but over the British Isles, but over in North America we pretty much rejected his ecclesiology, rejected his pneumatology. We basically just grabbed a hold of his eschatology. That's it, and just stamped it, imported it, and
that is true. But when you deal with going into England and some of those areas, they actually know more of Darby than us the American church today. The church in those areas know about Darby today than more about him than we do. But again, I think that has more to do with they're closer. Still, the ideas are still out there a little bit more and working and things like that.
That would trouble him to no end, far more than anything else. The fact that we're even caring about eschatology and we don't care about the church and the Spirit and the testimony.
So, obviously, if you're an independent church dispensationalist, Bible church, Baptist, whatever, if you're an independent church dispensationalist, you believe in the ruin of the church like he did. Like I think that's one thing that's still today. Like we're all like, the church is not going to save the world. We're going to need Jesus to come and do what we can. And we're not in a denominational structure that's cutting off other people. Like anybody could join a independent, one of these independent churches. Where do you think Darby would say we went wrong in ecclesiology? I would think he would say we got a lot right.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think if there's a pastor leading that church, he would say you got it all wrong.
Oh, he would, wouldn't he? He would. Oh, yeah.
Because the Spirit has been displaced by the pastor. Yeah.
He would.
So that's really important to him, and we don't even think.
And because again, a single pastor, you never see that in Scripture. Also, when you deal with the idea of elders and elder bishop, what you're dealing more with is teachers, overseers. So you're not dealing with how we have it structured like today, where it's one person getting up and just doing the speaking, and having the service structured like we have today. It is an allowance of going back to 1 Corinthians 14 and allowing 2 or 3 people, then maybe testimonies, other things, singing, and more of a allowing for a leading of the Holy Spirit to work and things like that, rather than a structured time of, okay, now, you know, how we start everything where, okay, we start with an opening song. We now do our prayer. We now go ahead and sing again. We go ahead and we do sing again. We make our announcements. We now do our offering. We sing one more song. The pastor gets up and preaches. We go ahead and he gives an invitation and we sing a song for the people to come forward. And then we go ahead and close in prayer and have everything structured. Darby and really was in fact of saying this is part of the problem is we're destroying the work of the Holy Spirit by being so structured. We're not allowing him to be a part of our service and for his leading and working to be done. And I will agree with that with him, because I look at the way our structure is done. It loses out on a lot of things that we are supposed to have as a church, especially in our corporate worship.
Think of that, you know.
I know it's in the book, and I totally forgot about it.
I mean, again, his idea of the ruin of the church was such, and that's the focus of my research, is his concept of the ruin of the church. It is to such a degree that he even rejected the appointment of elders. I mean, who would even conceive of that, right? Like we say, that's obviously instead of an executive pastor or a congregational model, a plurality of elders and deacons is God's government for the church as prescribed in the New Testament. And he would say, yes, but those elders were appointed by apostles or apostolic delegates. There was no succession laid out. So who should be appointing elders? And he says, because there's no one around to appoint the elders. In other words, elders don't appoint other elders, or churches don't just create, and start appointing elders, or as happens in most places, somebody, with an enterprising young man says, I will be an elder, and then starts their own church. I mean, he would say that is called a sect. You are now calling yourself a church and meeting on what basis? The minute you have defined yourself as a church as distinct from the church next door, you have formed a sect, with its own body of membership and its own, so he had a very, very different view of those things that would just,
and that's where I really didn't like Darby, because I feel like if you did practice fully what he taught, and I think I said this specifically in my review, you would just be a personality-driven church. Whoever had the strongest personality in the church would dictate it.
Now, again, Darby was really, one of the things is I think he was really emphasizing and working on the unity of the church. And of course, like in Ephesians 4, we have these different gifted people. And I'm not talking charisma gifted, but dorma, which is the gift of Jesus given in there. And so these different ones will work and stuff for the equipping of the saints, and the whole key also of Ephesians 4 is dealing with the church coming into unity together, not uniformity, but unity. And so Darby probably was more looking at things like that and wanting to emphasize those type of things rather than the structure. But again, I do think he missed it, because the Bible is clear about structure, certain structure. But again, I do think that today's church sometimes goes overboard on the structure and not doing what it's supposed to do either.
Because you have no structure to prevent the most charismatic person from taking leadership and control of the church.
And he was
the most woo would lead the church.
And the conflict in the 40s was that he saw the preeminence of Benjamin Newton, who had a strong personality and things were very much structured around him, and he points that out. By the 70s, I mean, he was that figure. He was the figure that everybody rallied behind, and now he had. Obviously, Benjamin Newton had long since been. Newton actually ended up becoming a Baptist later, but Darby supplanted Newton in terms of that role, and even in fact exceeded Newton in his preeminence among the brethren. Exclusive, certainly, but even really among all the brethren. I mean, he became everybody. Kowtowed to Darby. He was the preeminent one, and so if Newton was wrong for it, how wrong was Darby?
And so it's I'm not. I like some things of his ecclesiology. I like the ruin of the church, because I think we need.
Yeah, because and that's the thing. As a result of Darby wanting certain things and it being certain ways, he himself, it was like 4 different times, created a split where he left and restarted. he as it's he ended where within in his life, unfortunately, everybody he knew he separated from, except for one because that one passed away. But all the others he had no fellowship with anymore because he disagreed about something. He left them and started up a new thing. And so, as a result, and in the end, basically, the only ones that really still basically followed him were the ones that were reading his writings. So he himself did not have that, where he had that group that he would go into and teach on Sundays and during the week or things like that. So there were his own way of thinking created an ostracism that he ostracized himself from a lot of people.
Need Christ to come back and help us, but not as far as he took it. But I guess Darby and I would have I probably would have been somebody that Darby would have been like, really, he would have gladly butt heads with me. He wouldn't, I wouldn't have gotten the gentle, easy pass.
Right.
Like you book reviewer, I'll get you. So let's then go to book reviewer. So I put my review out there about the book, and I gave my thoughts about Darby and what I liked and what I learned and all that. And I as soon as I got done writing my review, my first thought was, I want to know what James thinks about what I said. So now I get to ask publicly, where did I go? What did I get best about Darby in my review, and what did I get worst about Darby or about Gribben's work? What do you think I had the best, and what do you think I had the worst?
Well, I think in my opinion, just watching it, it's difficult, I'm sure, especially if you're not too familiar with Darby, to assess Darby without measuring him against yourself as a standard.
Oh, of course, that's what I'm doing. Yeah,
that's what Christians do. Basically, what did he get right? What did he get wrong?
According to me,
and we all do that, right? So, again, realizing he was a man of his time, and his time was very different than ours, and he actually was in a very different country, so he didn't really even understand the church in North America, because he came from the Church of England, the Church of Ireland. You were born in the church, so when he was pushing back on clergy and clericalism, he was pushing back on a very different system than.
And I think that's a very good point that Dr. Fazio is mentioning, to remember that Darby was in a different era. He was in a different country. He was dealing with a lot different things than we are today. But again, I still think that we can grab a hold of truths and things like that, and we can see how probably some of the things that he has done is still affecting us today because of his teachings and things like that.
What we have, where everybody in the country is born into the church, baptized into the church. The idea of separation between church and state, he argued for. That was one of the biggest things he was championing, separation of church and state. Well, we had that in America, right? America was founded on that. So he was pushing back on something. So there's just so much different that it's always difficult when you're looking at a historical figure to assess them on our conventions and our values and things like that. So he was a man of his time. He was fighting back against things in his time, and I think.
And we always need to remember that when we're dealing with people in history. What was it? I had the name and it just left, but it's basically one that was done like in the 1500s. We're dealing with pastors and how should behave and things like that. And I had to read it in seminary, and I thought it was a very fascinating book, but I did not agree with a lot of things. But I also looked at the times that he wrote that book and understanding, and so he was actually ahead of his time, even though I didn't agree with some of the things that he stated. But there was a lot of things that he put in. I think it's a Reformed Pastor by Baxter, I think it was. I might got the author mixed up. But in dealing with that, and of course, this was more before the Reformation itself. But so we're not dealing with that. But you just have to understand the times that one of the things, and that's one of the things we deal with within Scripture itself, as taking the historical view, as we try to find out what is the time and what was being said and things like that during when a certain book was written. Now, this does not mean that the culture really is what's always influencing what is being written. Because you take, like with Paul, he changed up words at times. And so you might say, hey, the culture did it this way, but Paul is not speaking that way. And when you read and you start reading it and reading the different ways, where you start understanding that Paul is saying something a little bit different than what the culture was saying. It's the same word like church. Church just means gathering, but when we deal with more in the New Testament, it referred to an assembly, yes, but it's referring to a specific assembly, which we call the church. So you have to always, again, when you're dealing with people in history, we got to get it into context. But I think that's the same thing with us today. We got to find out what the different contexts a person is in. Are they from another country? Are they from another state? What is their background? What have they've been dealing with? Why are they coming up with or saying what they're saying? And we need to be a lot more open and things like that to more figure out where are they coming with their idea rather than always jumping on people about their idea.
To this day, the church would be in a much better place if we paid a lot more attention to Darby. And I do not mean by that, and I would not call myself a Darbyite. I've never been associated with the Plymouth Brethren in any way, but I believe that his voice, we need to pay a lot more attention to it. He has a lot more to benefit the church than the church has gained from his wealth of exercise in the written word. And it becomes really easy to dismiss someone because of their errors. But if everyone's dismissed based on their errors, then we're all dismissed. Who should we be listening to? So I think.
I do have to admit, I was part of a Grace Brethren church for a couple years. I never became a member because I would not get rebaptized, and because they hold to a tri-immersion. But they were the best church for me that I could be a part of in doing. But even though I was not a member, they allowed me to teach, to preach, to do different things in there because they knew where I stood and all. And it really became, it was basically, even though I wasn't a member, I had a great time with them. And we had a great time of fellowship together.
I think everyone would do well, the church would do well to pay a lot closer attention to Darby's research and writing and his ideas.
That was a nice peaceful Switzerland type answer. I guess I didn't pay attention to his time well enough. But was there anything that you would specifically say I got wrong? That you would think that
that
I might have just gotten factually wrong, Darby didn't believe that, or I said that he did. Yeah.
No, except that again, I think your pushback on his Calvinism, your pushback on his it's understandable that I think I don't know exactly where you're at theologically, but my guess is that many, if you believe in divine election, individual personal divine election, some don't. Free grace, some believe in corporate election. If you believe in eternal security,
Darby was huge on eternal security. So
right. Yeah. So the point is, it's very possible that by the critics, you also could be called a Calvinist. You know what I'm saying?
I do think that one point that I've learned reading some of the older people is that we've tightened the net, maybe is the right word to say, over the last 75 years, as far as narrowed what a dispensational is, narrowed what a Calvinist is, when it was much looser and broader for a lot of those terms before the 1930s or whenever they decided to start making those more narrow. Because it is surprising sometimes when I read some views of older Calvinists, wow, you would have really believed that, because I wouldn't put you in that category. For instance, Larry Pettigrew, who's with the Lord, but his book Forsaking Israel, he's got a couple of sermons by some Calvinists, and it's I don't think any Calvinist could say what those sermons said today and still be counted as a Calvinist, but you could back up.
And that's one of the amazing things is how Calvinism in itself has changed and become more rigid and things like that than maybe even before and dealing with and allowing for a broader understanding and allowance and thing and in dealing with that. And but again, I think as the church is going on and further, we're becoming we're allowing and we're becoming more carnal. We become more sectarian, basically like 1 Corinthians chapter 3. I'm of this, I'm of that, I'm of the other. Rather than allowing for we're looking for, instead of looking for unity, we're looking for uniformity. Everyone come into the same, look like the same, different, and therefore you are now a part of our group.
Okay. So you're right. The terminology does change a little bit. And you're right. Maybe I do need to dig deeper than just what I see in the book.
Yeah, so I've got a quote here. This is not from Darby. This is again from John Walker, but I mentioned there's a lot of similarities between these men in their time and their upbringing and their posture and with the Anglican Church. And he's the one who was frequently accused of being a Calvinist. And he said, just a quick quote here. He said, "I cannot prevent others from calling me a Calvinist, but it is not a name but it is a name that I never wish to assume. And this, not from any cowardly desire to conceal my views of divine truth, for I would rejoice to proclaim them to the world, but because I see that the scriptures positively testify against the practice of Christians distinguishing themselves by the names of human leaders. If I were to choose any man by whose name I would distinguish myself, I would be apt to select Paul and call myself a Paulite. But against this, Paul himself would protest. And shall I call myself a disciple of Calvin?" And then he says, but we call you a Calvinist because your views of scripture are the same with Calvin's. And he says, "I do not know that. In some points I believe they are, in some points I believe they're not. At any rate, it is not from Calvin's works. I've learned them." So, it's just.
Yeah, and Millennial Envoy goes in and he writes as to what we're talking about here. Let me go ahead and put it up here. Same thing can be said about Catholicism changing into what it is now. And that's true because even the Eastern Orthodox, because again, remember, Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox were the same, but as a result of basically Augustine, you started seeing this change in separation. And because again, the Eastern Orthodox did not follow in the Augustinian tradition of total depravity, original sin, infant damnation, things like that. They've been staying with what the traditional church of the early church, and they've kind of stayed that way. Where the Roman Catholics, they started doing a change up, and then of course, even with the Protestant Reformation, that created a change up, and then with the afterwards, you have your other change ups, and of course, today you don't know what the next pope is going to do because you don't know what this pope is going to do, because they're now changing up a lot of stuff that the church was against, and they themselves are getting further and further back to their being even more corrupted in the lifestyle of this world. But you can say that about Protestant churches also. I can't really speak to Eastern Orthodox because I don't know a whole lot about it as to its history, its changes, and things like that. But I'm sure that even though they have their more sticking with their, they had to change and grow in different type of things, but they probably have changed the least, the Eastern Orthodox.
I think that is very typical, and I think that would speak to Darby very much in the same way that people in that day were putting that label on him, and of course in this day people don't put that label on him, but it's saying, hey, within his time he suffered and was accused as a Calvinist at a time when it was not a pat on the back. It was actually to show how discordant he was. It was an accusation against him, and the same could be said of Darby. And so I think the point that Crawford is making is he's saying, hey, this guy was completely in line and would be embraced by Calvinists today, but at the same time he would completely distance himself from the label, from the system, from many of the things that Calvinists have built upon Calvin, just in the same way that, like I said, is really unrecognizable from Calvin's own teachings, just as the way the systematization of anything becomes so much more rigid and in fact almost no longer even reflects the views of the founder. We've already seen that with just.
Yeah, the thing is today's Calvinism would definitely be against Darby. Maybe not so much of his soteriology, but again, because of his understanding of the church with dispensational, which goes against covenant theology, which is more where they hold to. And so even of that day, there was, I know, like Charles Spurgeon very much disliked Darby. He did not care for the dispensational understanding and things like that. So Charles Spurgeon, which was one of his contemporaries, really did not like Darby at all.
Sensationalism, haven't we?
Yeah. Do you think there are any Darbyites today? Do you think there's any churches who follow?
Yes, they're
main?
They're very few, and they're a dying breed, and they're in overseas. But they're the exclusive brethren, and they are,
So there's still some exclusive brethren.
There are still some. There's still some, but they're, like I said, they're not reproducing. They're not going to be around for very long.
Would you say that the Brethren Church in America aren't Darbyites anymore?
Well, I mean, Darby has a lot of the Open Brethren have a tremendous respect for Darby and read Darby, and I think that the Open Brethren actually do a much better job continuing in the tradition of Darby's locus of thought and his heart and his, again, I think the whole exclusive movement got away from him. I mean, and Gribben did a good job pointing that out. Even that they ended up being he lost almost every one of his friends, and he lost control, and yet he was the very figure that was at the head of it all, and yet based on his rigid separation from different sects within the Brethren movement, it kind of took on a life of its own, and he ended up very, very discordant even with the direction that the Brethren went, the exclusive Brethren.
It's just it is so fascinating, his heritage, that he's talked about, he's demeaned, he's hated, the vitriol toward Darby and toward dispensationalists at times is just nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll even be like, well, it's just being honest about him. But if you look at the people who actually follow his writings, it's so few, but then at the same time he's had this massive impact. So it is just kind of mind-boggling how his place in church history, very, very unique.
Yeah, and I agree. The fact is both dispensational and non-dispensational. Most people are against, if they're against dispensationalism, they're against the today's dispensational. They're not so much because they don't really know what Darby, but then they make all these accusations. But it's the same thing with dispensationalists, because we have not had these things for Darby. We make all these claims and saying Darby, but Darby never held them. And so we ourselves are shown not to be understanding or truthful and dealing with that, where we have, and this is one of the reasons why, if we're going to say we're a dispensationalist, we got to be dealing with that. Okay. Let's see. There's a bit more to it than a simple exclusive open brethren divide. I come across from a group in the middle called Kelly Glatton Brethren, who are Argent Darbyists. Okay, we got someone who knows about the Argent Darbyists and stuff. Yeah, it's but you got to remember what they're more dealing with and is the overview. But yes, I agree, because even Darby started moving and he excluded himself from the exclusivist, because and he so it just create in dealing with that. So now so yeah, I can understand. It's because just to let people know, the exclusive was more of an understanding that, okay, though we're a large group and all, what we need to do is we need to have it in such a way where when we do have to discipline someone, because what is about discipline for the most part, that then as a whole, we recognize this discipline happening. The open are more of each individual gatherings are their individual gatherings, and therefore the others do not have to recognize what the other one is doing, which is basically kind of like what we do today. So it really, so there is variances and things like that on the difference between open, exclusive, and then, like I said, Darby was an exclusive, but then he got into a thing and he broke off from them. And so you have a lot, because they started doing, they were basically, some were making the claim, and as a result, the problem is because of the power Darby had, and this was creating a problem. And then Darby left because of dealing with at the end. In our brethren, the Darby version is used, but we are not exclusive in the way that the exclusion brethren are known for, and we are not autonomous either. Yeah, right. I can understand that, because again, the way Darby wanted it doesn't fully work. And I would not. I mean, I applaud him for what he was wanting. I think it needed to be thought through a little bit better, because again, if he kind of said there's no elders, or elders or bishops, that type thing. But the thing is the Bible clearly speaks of this. You don't need to have it passed on by apostles. But again, that comes from his Church of England Catholic background of this apostolic succession, things like. So his culture and his upbringing influenced him, and so, which happens to us all. And so we have blinders on because of what we've been taught and things, to sometimes what the real truth is. I just praise God that we're able to grow, and we're able to at least then see things and say, okay, I can't agree with this anymore. I see this better in Scripture, and move over, and we have, God works in us to be able to grow and to move forward and things like that. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing dealing with. I have the book that deals with the two things, but I haven't actually read through the whole thing. It's again one of the things in my list. I got about 5 or 6 books. So again, it's going to be, and right now I just don't do a lot of the reading like I should, because I'm dealing with other stuff reading, and I consider that more pleasure reading, and I don't get to the pleasure reading as much. Okay. Did you watch the debate between Layman and Luke? I can't remember. I know Luke was I may have seen some of it. I know Luke was dealing with the whole thing with James, and that of I mean, is it really inspired, different things like that. But no, I didn't get. I dealt with some of it, but I may not have seen that specific debate. I will admit I don't get to see everything. Again, I have to work. I have other things. My time is limited. It's the same way with Charles. He's not able to see everything that we're doing, but he trusts us, PB and myself, in dealing, and same with his wife. And so right now it's basically us 4. Hopefully when we get past the summer, we'll be able to get maybe some more people back that are wanting to in dealing with, because it's the summer, just like with everything, you lose viewership, you lose different things simply because people get busy and all, because again, they're not stuck in the house because it's cold. Okay.
Because like we still have the Lutherans, we still have the Calvinists, obviously. You'd think we'd have Darbyites more that really followed his teaching, but not so much. I don't even feel like dispensationalists could take that title, because we've changed it so much. So
yeah, not at all. The dispensationalists are not the line of Darby at all, really. And there isn't, but he also wanted it that way. I mean, there's a reason why he didn't even use his name in print. There's a reason why they used the J and D moniker, just the initials. And many times when referring to other people or other people refer to him, they would just say, Mr. D line, so that it doesn't even say Darby, and it doesn't even, they wouldn't even identify one another in print. They wanted Christ to increase, and that meant they had to decrease. And which again is the tremendous paradox of Darby becoming this larger than life figure, and his teachings becoming so prominent within the Brethren movement and overseas everywhere. But at the same time, he didn't want his name on things. He didn't want anything ascribed to him. So it's paradoxical for sure.
Yeah, and in an odd way, he lived out John the Baptist. He must increase, so I must.
Okay, got a question here. Says, again, Simon says, our branch of brethren are almost dying out now. And that's what they said, is a lot of them, those that would be more considered in the exclusive, are dying out. And I think, but again, if you're dying out, that's more because of outreach than anything. But the other factor that can happen is dealing with even if you are dealing with outreach and all, depending on where you're at, you could deal with issues of war and things like that, and that starts scattering, and that will destroy churches and cause things. And so you can have a small group or things be wiped out also that way. In fact, that what was it? You take the Church of Ephesus. It was given the warning in Revelation 2, that about if they need to change. They did change, and they lasted to like the 300s. And then finally, the church itself was destroyed because of war. And so when I say the local, not the people themselves, because again, they scattered, but it never accumulated back as the church at Ephesus. So it changed in that way.
Decrease and had a big impact nonetheless. So but there is our discussion with Dr. James Fazio on Jay and Darby and the Roots of Dispensationalism by Crawford Gribben. I've already had some people comment on my first review and said that they've purchased the book as a result of the review. I hope that this interview will encourage more people to go out and purchase it and know that. I think the biggest thing for me in this, James, which I'm happy we've been able to have this discussion, is I feel like I can have a little bit more confidence in not having a mischaracterized view of Darby, because I do feel like there is far more lies about him circling around the church than there are, factual information, and not even necessarily lies, but just we think something is from Darby when it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's really from Schofield or Schaefer or Brooks or one of those guys, or Ryrie, but it's not from Darby. And so to get back and to see what Darby actually believes, it's a fascinating journey.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate the time, and I'll be looking forward to your book. So get me a front row seat when that comes out, and we'll have you back here on Rev Reads. But thank you so much for your time, James. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, good to be here with you again.
All right, and if you're new to Rev Reads, subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date.
Okay, let me go ahead and minus this so it's okay. Again, I dealt with the channel Rev Reads. That's the one I got the thing. Again, we're not dealing with the debate. Rev Reads is free grace. He actually we've had discussions with him with the layman or on different things that I believe, or I know I've talked with him through Facebook on different things. I also wrote him. I don't think it was this one. Was it this one? Yeah, I wrote him where I put in and I said, love the discussion. I saw so many flaws with the Schofield and Ryrie ageism and ready to give up dispensationalism as a system and just keep the hermeneutics. But I wanted to look into Darby, and a friend pointed me to Roy Huebner, Elements of Dispensational Truth, Volume 1. And yes, I let him know there was Volume 2 through 5 also, which I have. I realized the issue I had with classical dispensation and how I, seeing Scripture, how some of it fits better with Darby better. So I I basically call myself more in the Darby camp. I'm not a Darbyite, but I'm more in the Darby camp. But again, I would not be a Darbyite myself. But that's because I do hold certain basic stuff that Darby would hold, more of where Darby would hold. But I'm not saying, but I have to say a Darby camp because I don't agree with everything. And in dealing with that, on the one I think we did last week, I didn't show it, but what happened was I basically joked with him on the fact of, here you go ahead and give us have all this information, and all you do is give us an hour's worth and leave us wanting more. And he loved it because again, I did it in such a positive way, but at the same time say, I want more. But again, it's my area that I enjoy. So that's the thing. If you're not in that area, you are. I can understand you not really caring or so much. I hope that again. I know we're coming down to an end with the program, and I'm glad this one went longer than the last one and all. But and I think a lot of that has even more interaction with the audience today than we did last week. But again, I think with last week, that being an introduction, and now this week, it allowed you all to have at least something, and now to be able to ask more questions. And then, like I said, tomorrow I'm going to be doing the overview of basically what Darby understood dealing with dispensationalism, and that what will happen is, again, I want it to be interactive with the audience. So again, going to putting in your questions, things like that. Since we're dealing with basically 9 different points, what we'll deal with is more of I'll go through the 1 point, and then I'll say different things, and then we'll look at if anybody's asking any questions, dealing with it, stuff like that, and going back and forth that way. And that can even allow for, as we're going through the points, if there's even something that then comes up from a earlier point that was mentioned, I can go ahead and talk about, answer those questions. And then we can even maybe and as I even did with this one here, where there may be knowing some things that wasn't being mentioned in the videos, we can go even further and sharing the different things that I have learned. But again, we're coming about this one instead of me saying, okay, this is exact to where I'm trying to say, okay, more of everything, my understanding, where I'm trying to get more of an education of understanding where Darby was. And then on top, but with tomorrow, I will kind of put in where I agree with, where I do not agree with. Now, in the Calvinist points that he puts out, I'll put you up front. I'm not going to agree with him on that. So there's several times you could see the influence of his Calvinism, and so I'm going to disagree with that. And we're going to see that in the very first point, the first half. But again, it's kind of stated the same way even today, and I kind of disagree with it. So, but I'm not going to tell you what, because if you're going to have to wait until either tomorrow, come listen, or you'll have to listen to it afterwards and do that. So again, as we come to an end, hope you enjoyed this, learned something, understand Darby even better. So again, getting a better understanding of who he is, where he kind of stood, different things he did for your help. Millennial goes ahead and puts in the thing. Tell us the doctrine behind the Kertrant thing. Yeah. So, and like I said, tomorrow we're going to more deal with the his understanding of dispensationalism. It's not going to be a video. It's actually me presenting the paper, taking what Roy Huebner wrote, and then expounding on from what I've read from multiple books that he has written, and I'll mention two of them. And again, I'll mention presenttruthpublishers.com, because again, I think I owe it to them. Now, again, Rev Reeves, if I encourage you, go look at him. He has a lot of books that he has done overviews on. And so if you want to get a better knowledge of different things out there, and like I said, it's not just dispensationalism, but he's read a lot of different books, dealt with a lot, and he would be a good one to go to. And if you're wanting to know about a subject or a book, he can give you a good overview and a look at and things like that. So as we come to a close here, again, if you like the program, remember, go ahead and click on the like button. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. If you also share so that others know of what we're doing and things like that, especially if anybody says, hey, I'm interested in what Darby has actually dealt with or whatever, this would be a good video to share and get them started with different areas on dealing with Darby. And of course, at the top, we always have the PayPal account for those if you feel led to the Lord to give. This will help out Charles and Janet as they deal with keeping up the StreamYard, paying that, the different things that they're dealing with that, and then also the ministries that they are involved in as a result of having this channel. So if you do feel like giving, please do. So as we come to the end now, I am going to go ahead and land the plane. The plane is going to be landed. So everyone, have a good night, good day if you're across the world. And thank you for listening, and hopefully you got something out of this. And greetings all.